The Duke's arranged marriage was a cold, calculated bargain, meant to extinguish the fiery scandal threatening to consume Lady Eleanor Beaumont's family. A life of quiet sacrifice was her predetermined path, duty a heavy mantle upon her young shoulders. But some hearts refused to be silenced, even when bound by the strictest societal chains. Eleanor was prepared for a loveless union with a powerful man. What she wasn't prepared for was the chilling realization that her intended groom harbored a dangerous secret, one far more scandalous than her own family's ruin. Her sacrifice was not enough. It was merely the first step into a labyrinth of deceit. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. Lady Eleanor Beaumont possessed eyes like summer twilight, hair the shade of rich mahogany that caught the candlelight with burnished warmth, and lips a natural rose. Her beauty was undeniable, yet she carried it with a quiet grace that belied her inner turmoil. She was 20 years old, an age when most young ladies of her standing dreamt of balls, charming suitors, and declarations of undying affection. For Eleanor, such romantic notions felt like whispers from a distant, unattainable world. Her world was a gilded cage, its bars forged by duty and the cold, unyielding hand of societal expectation. The Beaumont family, once a beacon of respectability in the Shire of Kent, had fallen from grace, not through any fault of Eleanor's, but through the reckless indiscretions of her elder brother, Lord Charles. A catastrophic gambling debt, compounded by a scandalous entanglement with a woman of questionable repute, had threatened to unravel their entire lineage, pushing them to the brink of social ostracization and financial ruin. Lord and Lady Beaumont, once proud and unyielding, had aged years in a single season, their countenances etched with worry and thinly veiled despair. They sought a solution, a powerful alliance that could mend their fractured reputation and secure their future. That solution, they had decided with a heavy heart, was Eleanor. Her predetermined path was now crystal clear, an arranged marriage to His Grace, Alistair Vance, the formidable Duke of Ashworth. The Duke was a man of immense power and wealth, his estate sprawling across 3 counties, his influence reaching the highest echelons of London society. He was also a man nearly 20 years her senior, a widower, and possessed of a reputation for sternness that bordered on the autocratic. The union would be a lifeline for her family, a sacrifice Eleanor was told many times she should be grateful for. The weight of her family's hopes and the spectre of their disgrace rested squarely upon her slender shoulders. Her days at Ashworth Manor, her ancestral country estate, now considerably reduced in grandeur and staff, were a testament to the suffocating confines of her existence. Mornings began with the precise ritual of dressing, assisted by her quiet maid, Clara, a young woman whose compassionate eyes often betrayed a shared understanding of Eleanor's unspoken burdens. Then came the hours dedicated to accomplishments, a solitary hour at the pianoforte, its melodies echoing hollowly through the drawing room, meticulous embroidery, her needlework creating perfect, lifeless blooms, and the reading of approved literature, volumes of sermons and moral essays that offered little escape from her encroaching reality. Walks through the manicured gardens were always chaperoned, her steps measured, her thoughts carefully guarded. Every interaction, every gesture was observed and silently judged, her very being a delicate instrument poised to fulfill its ultimate purpose. Eleanor longed for more than this pristine, predictable existence. In stolen moments, hidden behind volumes of classical poetry, she devoured forbidden novels, tales of passionate love, heroic adventures, and independent spirits. She dreamed of a connection that transcended titles and fortunes, a shared glance that spoke volumes, a touch that ignited the soul. Such hopes, she knew, were the dangerous fantasies of a young girl, foolish and impractical in the face of her impending duty. Yet they persisted, flickering embers in the darkness of her resignation, a quiet rebellion against the fate meticulously planned for her. "Eleanor, my dear," Lady Beaumont would often begin, her voice a fragile whisper that carried the weight of their precarious position, "you must understand the importance of this match. The Duke is a highly respected man. To be the Duchess of Ashworth is an honor beyond measure, a position many young ladies would kill for." Her mother's words were always punctuated by a sigh, a quiet plea for understanding, or perhaps forgiveness. Eleanor understood. She understood the desperation, the shame, the fear of penury that drove her parents. She understood her role as the instrument of their salvation, the pawn in a high-stakes game of social redemption. The alternative, her mother had gently but firmly explained, was ruin, a fate worse than death for a family of their standing. Her first formal meeting with Duke Alistair Vance had occurred a month prior, a carefully orchestrated affair at a country assembly hosted by a mutual acquaintance. He was, as rumoured, undeniably distinguished, tall, with a commanding presence that filled a room, his silver-streaked dark hair immaculately styled, his deep-set eyes a startling shade of blue beneath aristocratic brows, his tailored coat of dark wool, his crisp linen, and the subtle gleam of a signet ring on his finger all spoke of immense wealth and impeccable taste. He moved with an effortless authority, commanding attention without uttering a word, a silent testament to generations of inherited power. When he finally approached her, his smile was courteous, almost charming, though it never quite reached his eyes. He spoke of the unseasonably mild weather, of the exceptional orchestra providing the evening's entertainment, of the recent successes of his prize-winning stallions. Eleanor found herself admiring his refined manners, his cultured voice, the smooth cadence of his words. But as their conversation continued, a subtle, unsettling shift occurred. His compliments, while outwardly flattering, felt less like genuine admiration and more like an appraisal. His gaze lingered, not with warmth or burgeoning interest, but with a scrutinizing intensity, as if she were a valuable piece of property he was considering purchasing, evaluating her merits and potential flaws. He inquired about her accomplishments, her domestic skills, her understanding of household management, all delivered with an air of one testing the suitability of an acquisition, a mistress for his vast estates. "You are, Lady Eleanor," he had concluded, his voice a low, resonant hum that brooked no argument. "Precisely what I require in a duchess. Your reputation is unblemished, your manners impeccable, and your beauty quite striking. I believe we shall suit admirably." There was no mention of affection, no hint of emotional connection, no suggestion of partnership or shared future, only a cold, dispassionate assessment of her suitability for the role. It was a transaction, pure and simple, and Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, a leaden weight settling in her chest. He was not overtly rude. In fact, he was painstakingly polite, a model of aristocratic decorum. But beneath the veneer of politeness lay an undeniable current of proprietorship, a subtle arrogance that assumed her consent as a foregone conclusion, a mere formality. He was the sun around which her world was expected to revolve, and she was merely a carefully chosen satellite placed into orbit for his convenience and prestige. The grand English Regency estate that would soon be her home, Ashworth Hall, had been described to her in glowing terms by her mother. A magnificent edifice of grey stone, adorned with intricate carvings and towering chimneys, it stood sentinel over acres of meticulously landscaped parkland and ancient forests. It was a monument to the Vance family's enduring power and prestige, a place where history whispered from every shadowed corridor, where generations of dukes had ruled with unchallenged authority. Eleanor knew it would be a breathtakingly beautiful prison, a golden cage where she would live out her days, adorned with jewels, surrounded by luxury, yet utterly devoid of true freedom or personal choice. She would be the Duchess of Ashworth, a title that carried immense weight and expectation, but she would no longer be simply Eleanor. She often walked to the library, a quiet refuge in her own home, seeking solace among the dusty tomes and the scent of aged paper. One afternoon, tracing the worn spine of a volume of Byron, her maid Clara entered, her face unusually solemn. "Lady Eleanor," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "a rider just arrived from Ashworth Hall. The Duke wishes to formally announce the betrothal next week. There will be a dinner for the families." Eleanor's hand instinctively tightened around the book, her knuckles turning white. Next week. The vague, distant future had suddenly snapped into sharp focus, transforming from an abstract concept into an imminent, unavoidable reality. The betrothal, the grand dinner, the formal declaration before society. It was all happening. Her heart gave a sudden, painful lurch, a desperate flutter against the confines of her ribs. The air in the room, usually comforting in its quietude, now felt thick and heavy, pressing down upon her, suffocating her with its certainty. She imagined Ashworth Hall, vast and imposing, its grandeur now taking on a more menacing aspect, a fortress guarding her from the outside world. She pictured the Duke, his distinguished features now tinged with a cold, possessive satisfaction, his blue eyes holding her fate. The golden cage was not just a metaphor, it was about to become her reality, its gates clanging shut forever. A tremor ran through her, not of fear precisely, but of a profound and growing unease, a premonition that the silence she had cultivated within herself, the quiet acceptance, would soon be shattered. Perhaps irrevocably. The war of hearts, though she did not yet recognize it as such, was about to begin. The introduction and Chapter 1 have been completed. The stage is set in Regency England, where Lady Eleanor Beaumont faces an arranged marriage to the formidable Duke of Ashworth to save her family from scandal. The narrative establishes her inner conflict between duty and her secret romantic hopes, while introducing the Duke as a distinguished yet subtly controlling figure who views her as a suitable acquisition rather than a partner. The week preceding the betrothal dinner passed in a blur of feverish preparations and mounting anxiety. Ashworth Manor, despite its reduced circumstances, was transformed into a semblance of its former glory. The silver was polished until it gleamed like captured moonlight. The crystal chandeliers were meticulously cleaned until each prism caught and refracted the candlelight into dancing rainbows. And the finest linens, carefully preserved from better days, were brought out from storage. Lady Beaumont supervised every detail with an almost manic intensity, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged flowers, adjusted place settings, and issued instructions to the small, overworked staff. This dinner was not merely a social occasion, it was a performance, a carefully choreographed display designed to convince the Duke and his entourage that the Beaumonts, despite their recent troubles, were still worthy of such an exalted alliance. Eleanor herself was subjected to endless fittings for her gown, a creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that her mother had commissioned from London at considerable expense, an expense they could scarcely afford. The dressmaker, a thin, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Pemberton, pinned and tucked with practiced efficiency, murmuring compliments about Eleanor's figure and complexion. But Eleanor felt nothing but a growing sense of detachment, as if she were watching someone else being dressed for a role in a play she had no desire to perform. The gown was beautiful, undeniably so, with its high waist, flowing skirts, and intricate embroidery at the bodice and sleeves. It was designed to make her look like the perfect bride, the ideal duchess, a vision of demure elegance and aristocratic grace. Yet when she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she saw a stranger, a porcelain doll being prepared for display, her true self buried beneath layers of silk and societal expectation. The evening of the dinner arrived with an unseasonable chill in the air, a biting wind that rattled the window panes and sent dead leaves skittering across the gravel drive. Eleanor stood in her chamber, fully dressed, her hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure adorned with a single strand of pearls, a family heirloom that felt heavy and cold against her skin. Clara stood behind her, making final adjustments to the gown, her reflection visible in the mirror, her eyes filled with a quiet, sympathetic concern. "You look absolutely beautiful, my lady," Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Like a princess from a fairy tale." Eleanor managed a weak smile, though it felt brittle and false. "Thank you, Clara," she replied softly, "but fairy tales, I fear, are for children. This is reality, and reality is far less forgiving." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the ordeal ahead. The sound of carriages arriving echoed from below, the crunch of wheels on gravel, the murmur of voices, the sharp commands of footmen. The guests were arriving. The performance was about to begin. Descending the grand staircase, Eleanor felt as if she were walking towards her own execution, each step measured and deliberate, her hand resting lightly on the polished banister for support. The entrance hall was ablaze with candlelight, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Her parents stood at the foot of the stairs, Lord Beaumont in his finest evening attire, his face a mask of forced joviality. Lady Beaumont beside him, her smile strained, her eyes darting nervously towards the drawing room where the guests were assembling. They both turned as Eleanor descended, and for a fleeting moment she saw a flicker of genuine emotion in her mother's eyes. Pride, perhaps, mingled with a profound sadness, a silent apology for the sacrifice they were demanding of her. "Eleanor, my dear," Lord Beaumont said, his voice booming with an artificial heartiness that grated on her nerves. "You are a vision. The Duke will be most pleased." He offered his arm and she took it, her fingers resting lightly on his sleeve, feeling the slight tremor that betrayed his own anxiety. Together they entered the drawing room. The room was filled with guests, a carefully curated assembly of local gentry, and a few select members of the Duke's own circle, all chosen to witness and validate this important alliance. Conversations hummed like a swarm of bees, punctuated by polite laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. Eleanor's gaze swept across the room, taking in the familiar faces of neighbors, the curious stares of strangers, and then, inevitably, it landed on him. Duke Alistair Vance stood near the fireplace, a commanding figure in his impeccably tailored black evening coat, his silver-streaked hair gleaming in the firelight. He was engaged in conversation with an older gentleman, but as if sensing her arrival, he turned, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers across the crowded room. He excused himself from his companion and moved towards her with a measured, deliberate stride, his expression unreadable, a mask of aristocratic composure. As he approached, Eleanor noticed for the first time a subtle hardness in his features, a tightness around his mouth, a coldness in his gaze that sent a shiver down her spine, despite the warmth of the room. He bowed formally, taking her hand and raising it to his lips, in a gesture that was perfectly correct, yet utterly devoid of warmth. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, resonant murmur, "you are, as always, a picture of grace and beauty. You do me great honor this evening." Your Grace," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning within her. "The honor is mine." The words felt hollow, a scripted response in a play she had not written. He offered his arm, and she placed her hand upon it, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fine fabric, the undeniable strength that seemed to radiate from him, a strength that felt less protective and more possessive. He led her through the room, introducing her to members of his party. There was Lord Pemberton, a portly man with a florid complexion and a booming laugh, Lady Ashford, an elderly woman with sharp, assessing eyes and a thin, disapproving mouth. And then, standing slightly apart, a young woman who made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. She was strikingly beautiful, with golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, eyes the color of a summer sky, and a figure that was both elegant and voluptuous. displayed to perfection in a gown of sapphire blue silk that seemed almost scandalously low-cut for a country dinner. She held herself with an air of confident superiority, a knowing smile playing on her lips as the Duke approached with Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor Beaumont," the Duke said, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, one that Eleanor couldn't quite decipher. "May I present Miss Charlotte Ashford, my late wife's younger sister, and a cherished member of my household at Ashworth Hall." He paused, his gaze flickering between the two women, a strange, almost anticipatory glint in his eyes. "Charlotte has been an invaluable companion to me since my dear wife's passing. She manages the household with remarkable efficiency and grace." Charlotte Ashford extended a gloved hand, her smile widening, though it never reached her eyes, which remained cold and calculating, appraising Eleanor with the same scrutinizing intensity the Duke himself had displayed. "Lady Eleanor," she purred, her voice honeyed and smooth, yet laced with an undercurrent of something sharp and unpleasant. "What a delight to finally meet you. Alistair has spoken of you so extensively. I do hope you will find Ashworth Hall to your liking. It can be quite overwhelming for those unaccustomed to its grandeur." The emphasis on certain words, the subtle condescension in her tone, was unmistakable. This was not a welcoming greeting. It was a veiled challenge, a declaration of territory. Eleanor felt a prickle of unease, a sense that she had just stepped into a carefully laid trap, though she could not yet discern its nature. "Miss Ashford," she replied, keeping her voice polite and measured, "I am certain Ashworth Hall is magnificent. I look forward to learning its ways." She met Charlotte's gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Charlotte's smile sharpened, a predatory gleam entering her eyes. "Oh, I am certain you will, my dear. Alistair is a most exacting master. He expects perfection in all things." She glanced at the Duke, a look passing between them that Eleanor could not interpret, a silent communication that excluded her entirely, a shared understanding that made her feel like an outsider, an intruder in a relationship she did not yet comprehend. Dinner was announced, and the guests began to move towards the dining room. The Duke offered Eleanor his arm once more, leading her to the head of the table, where she was seated to his right, the place of honor for the future Duchess. Charlotte Ashford was seated directly across from her, a strategic placement that allowed the woman to observe Eleanor's every move, every gesture, every flicker of emotion that crossed her face. The meal itself was a culinary triumph, a testament to the Beaumont cook's skill and the family's determination to impress. Course after course arrived, a delicate consommé, perfectly roasted pheasant, succulent lamb, an array of vegetables prepared with exquisite care, and finally a selection of elaborate desserts. Wine flowed freely, the conversation around the table a polite murmur of inconsequential topics, the weather, the latest news from London, the upcoming hunting season. Eleanor ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her attention divided between the Duke, who sat beside her with an air of quiet satisfaction, and Charlotte, who watched her from across the table with an unnerving intensity. The Duke engaged her in conversation, asking about her interests, her accomplishments, her views on household management, all delivered with the same assessing tone he had used at their first meeting. He spoke of Ashworth Hall, of its history, its grandeur, its importance, painting a picture of a life of unparalleled privilege and responsibility. He spoke of his expectations for his future Duchess, her role in society, her duties to his estates, her obligation to uphold the Vance family name. It was a monologue, not a conversation, a lecture on her future duties, delivered with an air of absolute authority. Eleanor listened, nodding politely, offering appropriate responses, but inside, a growing sense of dread coiled tighter and tighter, a serpent constricting around her heart. As the final course was cleared and the servants began to pour port and sherry, Lord Beaumont rose to his feet, tapping his glass with a spoon to gain the attention of the assembled guests. The room fell silent, all eyes turning towards him. He cleared his throat, his face flushed with wine and nervous excitement. "My dear friends," he began, his voice slightly unsteady, "Lady Beaumont and I are honored to have you all here this evening to celebrate a most joyous occasion. As you know, our beloved daughter, Lady Eleanor, has captured the attention and affection of His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth." He paused, beaming at Eleanor, who felt her cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and rising panic. "It is with immense pride and gratitude that we announce their formal betrothal. May this union bring happiness, prosperity, and honor to both our families." A polite round of applause rippled through the room. Glasses were raised, and murmurs of congratulations filled the air. Eleanor forced a smile, her face feeling stiff and unnatural, a mask she was struggling to maintain. The Duke rose to his feet, acknowledging the applause with a slight nod, his expression one of controlled satisfaction. He turned to Eleanor, his blue eyes fixed on hers, and for a moment she thought he might say something personal, something that hinted at genuine feeling, but instead he simply raised his glass. "To Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "my future Duchess, may she prove worthy of the honor bestowed upon her." The words struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Worthy, as if she were on trial, as if her value was contingent upon meeting his exacting standards, as if she were a servant being elevated to a position of privilege, expected to earn her place through obedience and performance. The applause continued, but Eleanor barely heard it, her ears ringing, her vision blurring slightly. She raised her own glass, her hand trembling, and took a sip of the sweet sherry, the liquid tasting like ashes in her mouth. And then, as the applause began to fade, Charlotte Ashford rose to her feet. The room fell silent once more, a curious hush descending as all eyes turned towards the beautiful blonde woman. She smiled, a dazzling, radiant smile that seemed to light up the room. But her eyes remained cold, calculating, fixed on Eleanor with a predatory gleam. "Your Grace," she began, her voice clear and melodious, carrying effortlessly across the room. "Lord and Lady Beaumont, esteemed guests, I too must offer my congratulations on this most unexpected announcement." The word unexpected hung in the air, laden with unspoken meaning, a subtle barb that immediately set Eleanor's nerves on edge. Charlotte paused, her gaze sweeping across the assembled guests, ensuring she had their complete attention. "I have had the privilege," she continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "of residing at Ashworth Hall for these past 3 years, managing His Grace's household, attending to his every need, providing him with companionship and comfort during his period of mourning." She paused again, her smile widening, her eyes now locked directly on Eleanor, a silent challenge, a declaration of war. "Indeed, I had come to believe, as had many within our intimate circle, that His Grace and I shared a special understanding, an understanding that perhaps might one day lead to a more permanent arrangement." A collective gasp rippled through the room, a wave of shock and disbelief washing over the assembled guests. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face, her heart plummeting into her stomach, a cold, icy dread seizing her. She looked at the Duke, expecting him to interrupt, to deny Charlotte's outrageous insinuation, to defend Eleanor's honor and their betrothal. But he remained seated, his expression unreadable, a slight frown creasing his brow, but no words of denial, no outraged rebuttal. He simply stared at Charlotte, a strange, almost resigned look in his eyes, as if he had been expecting this, as if this were part of some elaborate, cruel game. Charlotte, emboldened by the Duke's silence, pressed on, her voice rising slightly, her tone becoming more accusatory. "Imagine my surprise, then," she said, her gaze now sweeping across the room, addressing the shocked guests as if they were her jury, "when I learned quite recently that His Grace had decided to seek a bride elsewhere. A bride chosen not for affection, not for shared history or deep connection, but for expediency. A bride whose family, I understand, is in rather dire straits, facing scandal and financial ruin. She let the words hang in the air, each one a poisoned dart aimed directly at Eleanor and her family. One cannot help but wonder, Charlotte concluded, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, if this betrothal is truly a love match or merely a transaction, a business arrangement designed to salvage a tarnished reputation and secure a suitable mistress for Ashworth Hall, regardless of the existing attachments and expectations. The silence that followed was deafening, a suffocating void filled with unspoken accusations and shocked whispers. Eleanor felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet, as if she were falling into an abyss of humiliation and despair. Every eye in the room was now upon her, judging her, pitying her, whispering about her family's disgrace and her own desperate situation. She looked at her parents, seeing the horror and shame etched on their faces, her mother's hand clutching her throat, her father's face drained of all colour. She looked at the Duke, still seated, still silent, his expression now one of cold, detached observation, as if he were watching a mildly interesting theatrical performance, utterly unmoved by the devastation unfolding before him. And then, slowly, deliberately, the Duke rose to his feet. The room held its breath, waiting for his response, for his denial, for his defense of Eleanor. He turned to Charlotte, his gaze steady, his voice calm and measured, devoid of anger or passion. "Miss Ashford," he said, his tone almost conversational, "you overstep your bounds. Your assumptions regarding our relationship were always precisely that, assumptions. I have never made you any promises, nor have I encouraged any expectations beyond those of a valued household manager and a member of my late wife's family." He paused, his gaze flickering briefly to Eleanor, then back to Charlotte. "My decision to marry Lady Eleanor is mine alone, based on considerations that are none of your concern. I suggest you remember your place. It was not a defense. It was a dismissal, a cold, bureaucratic statement that did nothing to refute Charlotte's claims, nothing to restore Eleanor's shattered dignity, nothing to address the scandal that had just erupted in her own dining room. He had not denied a relationship with Charlotte. He had merely stated that he had made no promises. The implication was clear, devastating. There had been something between them, an intimacy, a connection, perhaps even an affair, and Eleanor was simply the more suitable, more socially acceptable replacement, the bride chosen for duty, not desire. Charlotte, far from being chastened, smiled triumphantly, a victor savouring her conquest. She inclined her head slightly towards the Duke, a mockery of deference. "Of course, Your Grace," she purred. "I merely wished to clarify the situation for Lady Eleanor's benefit. I would hate for her to enter into this marriage under any false pretenses." She turned her gaze back to Eleanor, her eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. "Welcome to Ashworth Hall, Lady Eleanor. I do hope you will find your stay enlightening." Eleanor could bear no more. The room spun around her, the faces of the guests blurring into a grotesque tapestry of shock, pity, and barely concealed amusement. The air felt thick and suffocating, pressing down upon her, crushing her beneath the weight of her humiliation. She pushed back her chair, the legs scraping loudly against the polished floor, a harsh, discordant sound that cut through the stunned silence. She rose to her feet, her legs trembling, her vision swimming with unshed tears. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, choked with emotion. I am unwell." Without waiting for a response, without looking at the Duke, without acknowledging her parents' horrified expressions, Eleanor turned and fled from the dining room. She ran through the entrance hall, her silk skirts rustling, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor, past startled servants, up the grand staircase, her breath coming in ragged gasps, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, hot and bitter. She reached her chamber, slammed the door behind her, and collapsed onto her bed, burying her face in the pillows, her body racked with sobs. The golden cage had not merely closed around her, it had been revealed as a stage for her public humiliation, a theatre where her sacrifice was not honored but mocked, where her future husband had stood by, silent and unmoved, as another woman laid claim to him, exposing Eleanor as nothing more than a convenient, socially acceptable replacement, a pawn in a game far crueler than she had ever imagined. The War of Hearts had begun, and Eleanor had just suffered her first, devastating defeat. What would become of her now, trapped in a betrothal built on lies and shadowed by a rival who clearly held the Duke's true affections? The night following the disastrous dinner stretched endlessly before Eleanor, each hour marked by the relentless chiming of the clock in the hallway, each chime a hammer blow against her shattered composure. She lay in her bed, still fully dressed in the ivory gown that now felt like a shroud, her face buried in tear-soaked pillows, her body exhausted from weeping, yet unable to find the mercy of sleep. The scene replayed itself endlessly in her mind. Charlotte's triumphant smile, the Duke's cold, detached silence, the shocked gasps of the guests, the pitying stares, the whispered conversations that had surely erupted the moment she fled the room. She had been humiliated, exposed, reduced to nothing more than a desperate girl from a disgraced family, clinging to a marriage that was clearly a sham, a business transaction where she was the least valued commodity. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pale grey and rose, Clara entered quietly, her face etched with concern and exhaustion. She had clearly spent the night awake as well, perhaps listening at the door, perhaps simply worrying for her mistress. "My lady," she whispered, approaching the bed cautiously, "you must let me help you out of this gown. You need rest." Her voice was gentle, filled with a compassion that made Eleanor's tears flow anew. Eleanor allowed herself to be undressed, her limbs heavy and unresponsive, her mind numb. Clara helped her into a simple nightgown, brushed out her tangled hair, and tucked her beneath the covers with a tenderness that reminded Eleanor of her childhood, of simpler times before duty and scandal had consumed her life. "What will happen now, Clara?" Eleanor whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "How can I possibly marry him after that? After everyone saw? After he said nothing to defend me?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back, her jaw setting with a determination Eleanor had rarely seen in her gentle maid. "I do not know, my lady," she admitted honestly. "But I do know this. You are stronger than you believe. You are kind, intelligent, and worthy of far more than what transpired last night. Do not let them break you." She squeezed Eleanor's hand, a silent promise of loyalty and support, before quietly leaving the room, drawing the curtains to block out the intrusive morning light. Eleanor did sleep, finally, a fitful, nightmare-plagued slumber, filled with images of Charlotte's mocking laughter and the Duke's cold, assessing gaze. She woke in the late afternoon, her head pounding, her eyes swollen and gritty. A tray of food sat untouched on her bedside table, brought by Clara hours earlier. The thought of eating made her stomach churn. She rose slowly, moving to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out at the familiar landscape of the estate. Everything looked the same. The manicured lawns, the ancient oak trees, the distant hills. Yet everything felt irrevocably altered, tainted by the events of the previous night. A soft knock at the door interrupted her bleak contemplation. "Eleanor?" It was her mother's voice, tentative and strained. "May I come in, my dear?" Eleanor hesitated, then sighed. "Yes, mother." Lady Beaumont entered, her face pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from her own tears. She looked older, more fragile, the weight of their situation pressing down upon her slender shoulders. She approached Eleanor slowly, as if afraid her daughter might shatter at the slightest touch. "My darling girl," she began, her voice trembling. "I am so terribly, terribly sorry. what that woman said. It was unconscionable, unforgivable, and the Duke, his silence. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, her own shame and disappointment evident. "What happens now, Mother?" Eleanor asked, her voice flat and emotionless, drained of all feeling. "Do we proceed with this farce? Do I marry a man who clearly harbors affections for another, a man who stood by and allowed me to be publicly humiliated in my own home?" Lady Beaumont wrung her hands, her distress palpable. "Your father and we have discussed this at length. The Duke sent a message this morning. He wishes to proceed with the betrothal. He claims Miss Ashford's outburst was the result of misplaced affection and jealousy, nothing more. He assures us that she will be removed from Ashworth Hall before the wedding, that she will no longer be a complication." She paused, searching Eleanor's face for a reaction. "He also offered a significant increase to your settlement, a gesture of apology, I suppose." Eleanor laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that held no mirth. "An apology? He thinks money can erase what happened? Can restore my dignity?" She turned away from her mother, staring out the window once more. "And what of my feelings, Mother? What of my right to refuse a marriage built on such a foundation of deceit and indifference?" Lady Beaumont's silence was answer enough. Eleanor knew the truth, the harsh, unforgiving reality of their situation. They had no choice. The scandal of a broken betrothal, especially after such a public spectacle, would be even more devastating than the original disgrace that had driven them to this desperate alliance. They would be utterly ruined, cast out from society, left with nothing. Eleanor was trapped more securely than ever, the bars of her golden cage now reinforced by humiliation and despair. "There is another option," Lady Beaumont said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your Aunt Agatha, my sister, has written. She heard of the incident. News travels fast, even to London." She paused, taking a deep breath. "She has invited you to stay with her for a time in her townhouse in Bloomsbury. She suggests a period of reflection, a chance for you to recover your spirits before the wedding. Your father and I believe it might be wise. A change of scenery, some distance from all of this." Aunt Agatha. Eleanor had not seen her mother's elder sister in several years. Agatha Hartwell was a widow, childless, and possessed of an independent spirit that had always scandalized the more conservative members of the family. She had inherited a comfortable fortune from her late husband, a successful merchant, and had chosen to live in London, pursuing her own interests, attending lectures, supporting charitable causes, and maintaining a salon frequented by artists, writers, and intellectuals, a decidedly unconventional circle for a woman of her age and station. Lady Beaumont had always maintained a polite but distant relationship with her sister, disapproving of Agatha's unconventional lifestyle and outspoken opinions. But now, in their hour of need, Agatha had extended a lifeline. "London?" Eleanor repeated, a faint spark of something, hope perhaps, or simply the desperate need for escape, flickering within her. "Aunt Agatha wishes me to stay with her?" "Yes," Lady Beaumont confirmed, her expression a mixture of relief and apprehension. "She believes the city, the distractions, the different society might be beneficial, and it would give the gossip here time to subside somewhat. The Duke has agreed to a postponement of the wedding, a few months, to allow for preparations." The unspoken truth hung heavy in the air. To allow the scandal to fade, to allow Eleanor to be moulded and prepared for her role, away from prying eyes and wagging tongues. Eleanor considered the offer. London, a city she had visited only briefly, a place of noise, crowds, and endless possibilities, so different from the quiet, stifling confines of the countryside. Aunt Agatha, with her unconventional ways and independent spirit, represented a world Eleanor had only glimpsed in her forbidden novels, a world where women might have voices, opinions, and lives beyond the narrow confines of marriage and domesticity. It was not freedom, Not truly, but it was a reprieve, a temporary escape from the suffocating atmosphere of Ashworth Manor and the looming spectre of her marriage to the Duke. It was a chance to breathe, to think, to perhaps discover some hidden reserve of strength within herself. "I will go," Eleanor said quietly, her voice gaining a fraction of its former resolve. "I will go to London, to Aunt Agatha." Lady Beaumont's relief was palpable. She embraced Eleanor, a brief, awkward gesture, then hurried from the room to make the necessary arrangements. Within 3 days, Eleanor found herself seated in a carriage, her meagre belongings packed into a single trunk, Clara beside her, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. As the carriage rolled down the drive, she did not look back at Ashworth Manor, did not allow herself a final, sentimental glance at the familiar landscape. She kept her gaze fixed forward, towards the unknown road ahead, towards London, towards Aunt Agatha, towards a future that was still uncertain, but perhaps, just perhaps, held a glimmer of something beyond despair. The journey to London took 2 days, the carriage rattling over rutted roads, stopping at coaching inns for brief rests and changes of horses. Eleanor spent the hours staring out the window, watching the countryside give way to villages, then towns, and finally the sprawling outskirts of the great city itself. The noise was overwhelming, the clatter of countless carriages and carts, the shouts of street vendors, the cries of children, the general cacophony of urban life. The air was thick with smoke and unfamiliar smells, a far cry from the clean, fresh air of the Kent countryside. Yet amidst the chaos and the grime, Eleanor felt a strange sense of anonymity, a liberation from the suffocating scrutiny of her small, insular world. Here she was just another face in the crowd, unknown and unremarked upon. Aunt Agatha's townhouse was located on a quiet, tree-lined street in Bloomsbury, a respectable but not overly fashionable neighbourhood, known for its proximity to the British Museum and its population of scholars, artists and professionals. The house itself was a narrow 3-story building of red brick, modest in size but well-maintained, with window boxes overflowing with colourful flowers and a brightly painted blue door. As the carriage pulled to a stop, the door flew open, and Aunt Agatha herself emerged, a whirlwind of energy and warmth. She was a woman in her late 50s, tall and robust, with iron-grey hair pulled back in a simple chignon, intelligent grey eyes that sparkled with life and curiosity, and a face that, while no longer youthful, was animated and expressive, radiating a vitality that belied her years. She wore a practical day dress of deep green wool, devoid of excessive ornamentation, and a paisley shawl draped over her shoulders. She was, in every way, the antithesis of Lady Beaumont's carefully cultivated, anxious gentility. "Eleanor, my dear child," Agatha exclaimed, rushing forward as Eleanor descended from the carriage. She enveloped her niece in a firm, enthusiastic embrace, a hug that was both comforting and invigorating. "Welcome, welcome. You look positively exhausted, poor lamb. Come inside at once. Mrs. Davies has prepared tea, and you must tell me everything. Well, perhaps not everything immediately. First tea and rest, then we shall talk." She ushered Eleanor and Clara into the house, her voice a cheerful, reassuring torrent of words. The interior of the townhouse was as unconventional as its owner. The walls were lined with overflowing bookshelves crammed with volumes on every conceivable subject: history, philosophy, science, literature, travel. Paintings and sketches, some quite modern and abstract, adorned the walls. Comfortable, slightly worn furniture was arranged in cozy groupings, inviting conversation rather than formal display. A large ginger cat dozed contentedly on a cushion near the fireplace. It was a home that felt lived in, loved, and utterly unpretentious, a stark contrast to the cold, formal grandeur of Ashworth Manor, or even the anxious, strained atmosphere of her own family home. Mrs. Davies, a plump, cheerful housekeeper with rosy cheeks and a welcoming smile, appeared with a laden tea tray. Agatha settled Eleanor into a comfortable armchair near the fire, poured her a cup of strong, fragrant tea, and pressed a plate of freshly baked biscuits into her hands. "Now then," Agatha said, settling into the chair opposite Eleanor, her gaze direct and compassionate, "your mother's letter was rather circumspect. But I have my sources, and I have heard whispers of what transpired at that dreadful dinner, a most appalling display from what I understand. That Ashford woman sounds like a viper, and the Duke, well, his behaviour was inexcusable." She paused, studying Eleanor's face. "How are you truly feeling, my dear? And please do not offer me polite platitudes. I want the truth." Eleanor, surprised by her aunt's directness and genuine concern, felt a lump rise in her throat. For the first time since the disaster, she felt safe enough to speak honestly, to voice the turmoil that had been churning within her. "I feel humiliated, Aunt Agatha," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Betrayed. Trapped. I am to marry a man who clearly cares nothing for me, who allowed another woman to publicly claim him, who sees me as nothing more than a suitable ornament for his estates. And I have no choice. My family's ruin depends upon this marriage. I am a prisoner, sentenced to a life of emptiness." Agatha listened intently, her expression grave, nodding occasionally. When Eleanor finished, she reached across and took her niece's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "My dear Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but resolute, "you are not a prisoner. You are a young woman who has been dealt a most unfair hand by circumstance and by the callous actions of others. But you're also intelligent, resilient, and possessed of a spirit that I suspect has been suppressed for far too long by the stifling expectations of your upbringing." She paused, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "You are in London now, my dear, a city of possibilities, of new ideas, of people who think and live differently. You have a few months before this wretched wedding. Let us use that time wisely. Let us not simply hide away and lick our wounds. Let us explore, learn, and perhaps discover who Eleanor Beaumont truly is, beyond the role of dutiful daughter and reluctant bride." Eleanor stared at her aunt, a flicker of hope, fragile but real, igniting within her. "What do you mean, Aunt Agatha?" Agatha smiled, a wide, encouraging smile. "I mean, my dear, that you shall accompany me to lectures, to galleries, to my salon evenings. You shall meet people who value intellect and character over titles and fortunes. You shall read books that challenge your assumptions and expand your mind. You shall, in short, begin to live, truly live, perhaps for the first time in your life. And who knows," she added, her eyes sparkling with a knowing glint, "you may discover that there are alternatives to a life of quiet desperation, that there are men in this world who value a woman for her mind and spirit, not merely her suitability as a broodmare for their estates." Over the following weeks, Aunt Agatha proved true to her word. Eleanor's days in London were a revelation, a stark contrast to the monotonous routine of her life in Kent. Agatha introduced her to a world she had never imagined existed. They attended lectures at the Royal Institution, where distinguished scientists and scholars spoke on topics ranging from geology to astronomy to the latest advancements in medicine. Eleanor, who'd been taught only the most superficial accomplishments deemed suitable for a lady, found herself captivated by these discussions, her mind awakening to new ideas and possibilities. They visited art galleries where Eleanor gazed upon paintings that challenged conventional notions of beauty and representation, works that evoked emotion and provoked thought rather than simply depicting pretty scenes. They spent hours in bookshops, Agatha encouraging Eleanor to choose volumes that interested her, regardless of whether they were deemed appropriate for a young lady. But perhaps most transformative were Agatha's salon evenings. Once a week, Agatha opened her home to a diverse and eclectic group of individuals, writers, poets, artists, reformers, educators, and intellectuals of all stripes. They gathered in Agatha's drawing room, engaging in lively debates and discussions on literature, politics, social reform, and the pressing issues of the day. Eleanor, initially shy and hesitant, found herself drawn into these conversations. her opinions solicited and valued, her intelligence recognized and encouraged. It was intoxicating, liberating, to be treated as an equal, as a thinking individual, rather than a decorative object or a pawn in a dynastic game. It was at one of these salon evenings, about 6 weeks into her stay in London, that Eleanor first met Dr. Elias Reed. He arrived late, apologizing profusely to Agatha for his tardiness, explaining that he had been detained at the hospital where he worked. He was a man in his early 30s, tall and lean, with dark brown hair that was slightly disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it repeatedly, and warm, intelligent hazel eyes that held a depth of compassion and understanding. He was not conventionally handsome in the aristocratic mold of the Duke. His features were more rugged, his manner less polished. His attire, a simple, well-worn coat and cravat, speaking of a man who valued substance over superficial display. He was, Agatha explained in a whispered aside to Eleanor, a physician who dedicated much of his time to providing medical care to the poor in the East End, a man of principle and deep social conscience. Dr. Reed was introduced to the assembled guests and quickly became engrossed in a discussion about the appalling sanitary conditions in London's slums and the urgent need for public health reforms. Eleanor listened, fascinated by his passion, his eloquence, and his genuine concern for the suffering of others. He spoke not with the detached, theoretical air of an academic, but with the raw emotion of someone who had witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of poverty and neglect. His words were powerful, moving, and utterly devoid of the self-serving rhetoric she had grown accustomed to hearing from men of her own class. During a lull in the conversation, Dr. Reed's gaze fell upon Eleanor, who was seated quietly near the fireplace, a book of poetry resting in her lap. He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and approached her. "Forgive me," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone. "I do not believe we have been introduced. I am Elias Reed, Lady Eleanor Beaumont." Eleanor replied, offering her hand, which he took briefly, his touch warm and firm. "Ah, Lady Eleanor," he said, his smile widening slightly. "Mrs. Hartwell has spoken of you. She tells me you have a keen mind and a thirst for knowledge, qualities I greatly admire." He gestured to the book in her lap. "Wordsworth? An excellent choice. The world is too much with us. Late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Quite apt for our times, I think." Eleanor was surprised and pleased that he recognized the volume and could quote from it. "Indeed," she agreed, finding her voice, "I find his reflections on nature and the human condition comforting in a way, a reminder that there is beauty and meaning beyond the superficialities of society." Dr. Reed's eyes lit up with interest. "Precisely. You understand him well. Too often poetry is dismissed as mere frivolous entertainment, when in truth it can be a profound source of insight and solace." He paused, studying her face with a gentle, assessing gaze that was entirely different from the Duke's cold scrutiny. "Mrs. Hartwell mentioned you have recently arrived from the countryside. Are you finding London to your liking?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger, yet finding herself strangely drawn to his open, honest manner. "It is overwhelming," she admitted, "but also invigorating. So different from what I have known. Aunt Agatha has been most kind, introducing me to new perspectives." "She is a remarkable woman," Dr. Reed agreed warmly, "a true champion of progress and enlightenment. And I suspect," he added, his gaze holding hers, "that you possess a similar spirit, Lady Eleanor, one that perhaps has not yet had the opportunity to fully flourish." His words, spoken with such quiet conviction, sent a strange warmth through Eleanor, a feeling she could not quite name. It was not the fluttering nervousness she had felt in the Duke's presence, nor the cold dread that had followed the disastrous dinner. It was something gentler, more hopeful, a sense of being truly seen and understood, perhaps for the first time in her life. Before she could formulate a response, another guest engaged Dr. Reed in conversation, drawing him away. But throughout the remainder of the evening, Eleanor found her gaze returning to him, observing the way he listened intently to others, the way he spoke with passion and conviction, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He was, she realized with a start, utterly unlike any man she had ever met. And for the first time since the humiliation at the betrothal dinner, Eleanor felt a flicker of something beyond despair, a whisper of possibility, a tentative question forming in her mind. Could there be a different kind of future, a different kind of man, a different kind of life than the one that had been so cruelly laid out for her? The seed of change had been planted, and in the fertile ground of Aunt Agatha's unconventional world, it was beginning, ever so slowly, to take root. The weeks that followed Eleanor's first meeting with Dr. Elias Reed unfolded with a rhythm entirely foreign to her previous existence. London, once overwhelming in its noise and chaos, began to reveal itself as a city of hidden gardens, quiet corners, and unexpected connections. Aunt Agatha, observing the subtle shift in her niece's demeanor, the return of color to her cheeks, the spark of curiosity rekindling in her eyes, redoubled her efforts to immerse Eleanor in the vibrant intellectual and social life she herself cherished. The salon evenings continued, each one bringing new faces, new ideas, and increasingly the reliable presence of Dr. Elias Reed. He became something of a fixture at Agatha's gatherings, his work at the hospital permitting. Eleanor found herself anticipating these evenings with a flutter of excitement she had not experienced in months, perhaps years. Their conversations, initially polite and exploratory, deepened with each encounter. They discussed literature. He introduced her to the works of Mary Wollstonecraft, whose radical ideas on women's rights both shocked and exhilarated Eleanor. They debated philosophy, with Elias patiently explaining the principles of utilitarianism and the social contract, treating her opinions with a respect that was both novel and profoundly affirming. He spoke of his work in the East End, painting vivid, often heartbreaking pictures of the poverty and suffering he witnessed daily, his voice filled with a passionate determination to effect change, to use his skills and knowledge to alleviate the misery of those society had forgotten. Eleanor, in turn, found herself opening up to him in ways she had never imagined possible. She spoke of her love for poetry, her secret fascination with history, her frustration with the limitations imposed upon her by her sex and her station. She even, haltingly, confided in him about the disastrous betrothal dinner, the humiliation she had endured, the cold, transactional nature of her impending marriage. She did not mention the Duke by name, nor the specific details, but Elias, with his keen perception and compassionate nature, understood the essence of her pain. He listened without judgment, his hazel eyes filled with a sympathy that was neither pitying nor condescending, but rather deeply empathetic. "You deserve far better, Lady Eleanor," he said quietly one evening, as they stood together near the window of Agatha's drawing room, the sounds of animated conversation, a pleasant hum behind them. The gas lamps outside cast a soft golden glow on the street below. "You deserve a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection, not a business arrangement that diminishes your worth and disregards your feelings." Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "But what choice do I have, Dr. Reed?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My family's honor, their very survival, depends upon this marriage. To break the betrothal now, after everything that has happened, would be to condemn them to utter ruin. I am trapped." Elias turned to face her fully, his expression serious, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "Perhaps," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "the cage is not as secure as you believe. Perhaps there are alternatives, possibilities you have not yet considered. The world is changing, Lady Eleanor. Slowly, yes, but it is changing. Women are beginning to find their voices, to claim their independence. It is not easy, and it requires courage, but it is possible." He paused, then added, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "And you, I believe, possess more courage than you know." His words, his unwavering belief in her, ignited a spark of defiance within Eleanor, a flicker of rebellion against the fate that had been imposed upon her. She did not know what alternatives he spoke of, could not yet envision a path that did not lead to Ashworth Hall and the Duke's cold embrace. But for the first time she allowed herself to imagine, to hope, that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be another way. Their connection did not go unnoticed. Aunt Agatha, ever observant, watched the growing bond between her niece and the young physician with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. She approved of Elias Reed wholeheartedly. He was intelligent, principled, compassionate, everything the Duke was not. But she also understood the precariousness of Eleanor's situation, the immense social and familial pressures bearing down upon her. One afternoon, as they sat together in the morning room, Agatha taking tea while Eleanor attempted to focus on her embroidery, Agatha broached the subject directly. "You have grown quite fond of Dr. Reed, have you not, my dear?" she asked, her tone gentle but direct, her grey eyes studying Eleanor's face. Eleanor felt a blush creep up her cheeks, her needle pausing mid-stitch. "He is a remarkable man, Aunt Agatha," she admitted quietly. "So different from anyone I have ever known. He treats me as an equal, values my thoughts and opinions. He makes me feel seen." Agatha nodded slowly, setting down her teacup. "He is indeed a remarkable man, and it is clear to anyone with eyes that his regard for you extends beyond mere intellectual companionship." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "But you must be cautious, Eleanor. Your betrothal to the Duke, however distasteful, is still binding. To be seen to encourage the attentions of another man, particularly one so far beneath your social station, could have serious consequences, not just for you, but for Dr. Reed as well. Society can be cruel to those who defy its conventions." Eleanor's heart sank, the brief flicker of hope dimming. "I know, Aunt Agatha," she whispered. "I know the impossibility of it all, but I cannot help how I feel. For the first time in my life I feel truly alive, truly myself. And it is because of him." Agatha reached across and squeezed Eleanor's hand, her expression filled with sympathy. "I understand, my dear, more than you know, but we must be practical. The wedding is still several weeks away. Use this time wisely. Explore your feelings, yes, but also think carefully about what you truly want, what you are willing to risk, and what the consequences might be. And remember," she added, her voice taking on a firmer tone, "you are stronger than you believe. Whatever you decide, I will support you. But the decision must be yours, and yours alone." As spring deepened into early summer, London's social season reached its zenith. Aunt Agatha, despite her unconventional leanings, maintained connections within certain circles of society, particularly those associated with the arts, philanthropy, and progressive causes. She received an invitation to a grand charity gala, a glittering event held at the Kensington estate of Lord and Lady Pembroke, prominent patrons of the arts and vocal advocates for social reform. The gala was to raise funds for a new hospital in the East End, a cause close to Agatha's heart and, by extension, to Dr. Reed's. Agatha, seeing an opportunity, insisted that Eleanor accompany her. "It will be good for you, my dear," Agatha declared, overriding Eleanor's initial hesitation. "You cannot hide away forever, and this is not some stuffy, conventional ball filled with gossiping matrons and fortune-hunting rakes. This is a gathering of people who actually care about making a difference in the world. Dr. Reed will be there, of course, as he is intimately involved with the hospital project. You will be among friends, Eleanor, and," she added with a knowing smile, "you will look absolutely stunning. We shall commission a new gown, something elegant but not ostentatious, something that reflects your true character, not the role you have been forced to play. The gown, when it arrived from the modiste, was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It was fashioned from silk in a shade of deep sapphire blue that brought out the twilight hues of Eleanor's eyes. The bodice fitted but modest, the skirt flowing gracefully, adorned with delicate silver embroidery that caught the light like scattered stars. It was beautiful, sophisticated, and entirely different from the virginal ivory gown she had worn to the disastrous betrothal dinner. When Eleanor looked at her reflection, she saw not a sacrificial lamb being led to slaughter, but a woman of intelligence and quiet strength, a woman who was beginning to discover her own worth. The evening of the gala arrived, warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming roses. Agatha and Eleanor arrived at the Pembroke estate in Agatha's modest carriage, joining a stream of far more opulent vehicles disgorging elegantly dressed guests. The estate itself was magnificent, a sprawling Palladian mansion set amidst beautifully landscaped gardens, ablaze with light from countless lanterns and torches. Inside, the ballroom was a dazzling spectacle of crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and walls adorned with priceless paintings. An orchestra played softly in one corner, and guests mingled, their conversations a sophisticated murmur punctuated by laughter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Eleanor felt a familiar flutter of nervousness as they entered, the sheer scale and grandeur of the event momentarily overwhelming. But Agatha, ever her anchor, took her arm and guided her through the crowd, introducing her to various acquaintances. Artists, writers, philanthropists, and reformers all engaged in animated discussions about their respective causes. Eleanor found herself relaxing, drawn into conversations that were intellectually stimulating and genuinely engaging, a far cry from the vapid small talk that had characterized the social gatherings of her previous life. And then, across the crowded ballroom, she saw him. Dr. Elias Reed stood near a tall window, engaged in conversation with Lord Pembroke himself. He was dressed in formal evening attire, a black coat and crisp white cravat, his dark hair neatly combed, though a few rebellious strands still fell across his forehead. He looked, Eleanor thought, breathtakingly handsome, his natural warmth and intelligence shining through even in this formal setting. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found hers. His face broke into a wide, genuine smile, a smile that seemed to light up the entire room, and he immediately excused himself from Lord Pembroke, making his way towards her through the throng of guests. "Lady Eleanor," he said, reaching her side, his voice warm with pleasure. "Mrs. Hartwell, what a delightful surprise! I had hoped you might attend this evening." He bowed formally to Agatha, then turned his full attention to Eleanor, his hazel eyes taking in her appearance with an admiration that was both respectful and undeniably appreciative. "You look absolutely radiant, Lady Eleanor. That colour is extraordinarily becoming." Eleanor felt a blush warm her cheeks, a flutter of pleasure at his compliment. "Thank you, Dr. Reed," she replied, her voice slightly breathless. "Aunt Agatha insisted I accompany her." "We are deeply grateful." Agatha waved a dismissive hand, though she was clearly pleased. "Nonsense, Dr. Reed. It is you and your colleagues who do the real work. I merely write checks and attend parties." She glanced between Eleanor and Elias, a knowing twinkle in her eye. "Now, if you will excuse me, I see Lady Ashford, the elder Lady Ashford, a dear friend, across the room. I simply must speak with her. Eleanor, my dear, I trust Dr. Reed will keep you entertained in my absence." With a conspiratorial smile, she swept away, leaving Eleanor and Elias standing together. An awkward silence descended for a moment, then Elias cleared his throat. Would you care to take a turn about the room, Lady Eleanor? Or perhaps step out onto the terrace? It is rather warm in here, and the gardens are quite beautiful in the evening light." Eleanor's heart quickened. To be alone with him, even in the relatively public setting of a terrace, felt both thrilling and dangerous. But she found herself nodding, unable to resist the pull of his presence, the desire to be near him. "The terrace sounds lovely," she agreed. He offered his arm, and she placed her hand upon it, feeling the solid warmth of him beneath the fine fabric of his coat. They made their way through the crowded ballroom, out through tall French doors and onto a wide stone terrace overlooking the gardens. The air was cooler here, fragrant with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and roses. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting a soft, romantic glow over the manicured lawns and flower beds. Other guests strolled along the pathways below, their voices a distant murmur. Eleanor and Elias walked to the edge of the terrace, leaning against the stone balustrade, gazing out at the tranquil scene. "It is beautiful," Eleanor said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "It is," Elias agreed, but when Eleanor glanced at him, she found he was not looking at the gardens, but at her. His gaze was intense, filled with an emotion she dared not name, an emotion that mirrored the confusing, exhilarating feelings swirling within her own heart. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I must confess, these past weeks, getting to know you, have been extraordinary. You are unlike any woman I have ever met. Your intelligence, your compassion, your quiet strength, you are remarkable." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Dr. Reed, she began, but he gently interrupted her. "Please, call me Elias," he said, his voice a near whisper. "When we are alone, at least. Formality feels wrong between us." "Elias," Eleanor repeated, the name feeling both foreign and intimately familiar on her lips. I feel the same. These weeks have been a revelation. You have shown me a world I never knew existed, a way of thinking, of being, that I never imagined possible. You have made me feel valued, seen, understood. I am—" She hesitated, then plunged forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "I am deeply grateful for your friendship." "Friendship," Elias echoed, a flicker of something, disappointment perhaps, crossing his face. He turned to face her fully, taking her hand in his, a bold gesture that sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Eleanor," he said, abandoning all pretense of formality, his voice thick with emotion, "I must be honest with you. My feelings for you extend far beyond mere friendship. I know the impossibility of our situation. I know you are betrothed to another, a man of wealth and title, a man I could never hope to rival in terms of social standing or fortune. But I cannot remain silent any longer. I have fallen in love with you, Eleanor, deeply, irrevocably in love." His words hung in the air between them, a declaration both thrilling and terrifying. Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling, her heart soaring and plummeting simultaneously. He loved her. This remarkable, compassionate, intelligent man loved her. Not for her family name, not for her suitability as a duchess, but for herself, for the woman she was beneath the layers of duty and expectation. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "Elias," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, I love you too. I did not want to admit it even to myself because it is so impossible, so utterly hopeless. But I do. I love you with all my heart." For a moment they simply stood there, hands clasped, gazing into each other's eyes, the world around them fading into insignificance. Then, slowly, tentatively, Elias leaned closer, his gaze dropping to her lips, a silent question in his eyes. Eleanor, her heart pounding, her breath shallow, closed the distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. A kiss that spoke of longing, of hope, of a love that defied all logic and convention. It was Eleanor's first real kiss, and it was everything she had ever dreamed of and more, a connection that transcended the physical, a merging of souls. They broke apart reluctantly, both breathless, their faces flushed. Elias cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "We will find a way, Eleanor," he said, his voice filled with fierce determination. "I do not know how, but we will find a way. I will not let you be trapped in a loveless marriage. I will not lose you." Before Eleanor could respond, a sharp, familiar voice cut through the night air like a shard of ice. How utterly touching! A clandestine romance on the terrace. How very common! Eleanor and Elias sprang apart, turning towards the source of the voice. Standing in the doorway leading back into the ballroom, silhouetted against the bright light within, was Charlotte Ashford. She was dressed in a gown of crimson silk that clung to her curves, her golden hair piled high, her blue eyes glittering with malicious triumph. And beside her, his face a mask of cold fury, stood Duke Alistair Vance. Eleanor's blood turned to ice, her heart plummeting into her stomach. The Duke. Here, in London, at this gala. She had not known he was in town, had not expected to encounter him, had allowed herself to believe, foolishly, that she was safe, hidden away in Aunt Agatha's unconventional world. But he had found her, and he had witnessed everything. Charlotte stepped forward onto the terrace, the Duke following close behind, his imposing figure radiating barely controlled rage. "Your Grace," Charlotte purred, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I told you we should investigate when I saw Lady Eleanor slip away with this gentleman. It appears your betrothed has been rather busy during her sojourn in London, forming attachments." The Duke's gaze was fixed on Eleanor, his blue eyes like chips of ice, his jaw clenched tight. He ignored Charlotte entirely, his focus solely on Eleanor and Elias. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice low and dangerous, each word clipped and precise, "I believe you owe me an explanation. And you, sir," he turned his icy gaze on Elias, "I do not believe we have been introduced, though I suspect introductions are somewhat superfluous at this point." Elias stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Eleanor, a protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by the Duke. "I am Dr. Elias Reed," he said, his voice calm and steady despite the tension crackling in the air. "And I owe you no explanation, Your Grace. My relationship with Lady Eleanor is—" "Your relationship?" the Duke interrupted, his voice rising slightly, a dangerous edge creeping into his tone. "You dare speak of a relationship with my betrothed, a woman who is promised to me, bound by honor and contract?" He took a step closer, his imposing figure looming over Elias. "You are a physician, I understand. A man of modest means and no particular standing. What could you possibly offer, Lady Eleanor, that I cannot provide 100-fold? Wealth, title, security. You are nothing, Dr. Reed, an insignificant insect presuming to reach for the sun." Elias's jaw tightened, but he held his ground, his gaze unwavering. "I offer her something you clearly cannot, Your Grace," he said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet dignity that was far more powerful than any bluster. "I offer her respect, genuine affection, and a partnership built on equality and shared values. I offer her love, Your Grace, something I suspect you know very little about." The Duke's face flushed with anger, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. For a moment, Eleanor feared he might actually strike Elias, but then, with a visible effort, he regained control, his expression hardening into a mask of cold disdain. He turned his attention back to Eleanor, his gaze raking over her with a mixture of anger and something else, hurt, perhaps, or wounded pride. "So," he said, his voice icy, "this is how you repay my generosity, my willingness to overlook your family's disgrace and elevate you to the position of Duchess. You engage in a sordid affair with a common physician, flaunting your infidelity in public." He paused, his gaze flicking to Charlotte, who stood watching the scene unfold with barely concealed glee. "It seems Miss Ashford was correct in her assessment. You are not worthy of the honor I bestowed upon you." Eleanor, who had been frozen in shock and fear, felt a surge of anger rising within her, burning away the ice. How dare he? How dare he speak to her of honor and worthiness? He who had allowed Charlotte to humiliate her, who had stood by in silence, who viewed her as nothing more than a possession, a suitable ornament for his estates. She stepped forward, her chin lifting defiantly, her twilight eyes blazing with a newfound fire. "Worthy?" she said, her voice trembling but strong, each word carefully enunciated. "You speak to me of worthiness, your grace. You who allowed another woman to publicly claim you as her own at my betrothal dinner. You who stood by in silence while I was humiliated before my family and friends. You who view marriage as a business transaction and a wife as a mere acquisition." She took a breath, her voice growing stronger, fueled by weeks of suppressed anger and newfound self-respect. "I have spent these weeks in London discovering who I truly am, beyond the role of dutiful daughter and sacrificial bride. I have met people who value intellect and compassion over titles and fortunes. And yes, I have met a man who sees me, truly sees me, for who I am and loves me for it. A man who is worth 100 of you, your grace, regardless of his lack of title or fortune." The Duke stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and fury. He was clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, particularly by a woman, particularly by his own betrothed. Charlotte, sensing the shift in power, stepped forward, her voice sharp and accusatory. "You ungrateful, foolish girl! Do you have any idea what you are throwing away? The Duke offered you everything, and you choose this nobody?" But before Charlotte could continue her tirade, a new voice cut through the tension, calm, authoritative, and utterly unexpected. "I believe, Miss Ashford, that Lady Eleanor is perfectly capable of making her own choices, and I, for one, applaud her courage in doing so." Everyone turned towards the doorway. Standing there, framed by the light from the ballroom, was Aunt Agatha, and beside her, looking stern and imposing, was Lord Pembroke himself, their host for the evening. Agatha's grey eyes were sharp and assessing, her expression one of quiet determination. Lord Pembroke, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and a commanding presence, surveyed the scene on the terrace with a disapproving frown. "Your Grace," Lord Pembroke said, addressing the Duke directly, his tone formal but firm, "I must ask you to moderate your tone. This is a charity gala, not a venue for private disputes. And I must say, I find your behaviour towards Lady Eleanor and Dr. Reed to be most ungentlemanly." He paused, his gaze sweeping over Charlotte with barely concealed distaste. "And Miss Ashford, your presence here and your inflammatory remarks are most unwelcome. I suggest you both take your leave, immediately." The Duke's face flushed with anger and humiliation. To be publicly reprimanded by Lord Pembroke, a man of considerable social standing and influence, was a significant blow to his pride. He opened his mouth to protest, but Lord Pembroke raised a hand, silencing him. "I said immediately, Your Grace. Do not make me repeat myself." For a long, tense moment the Duke stood frozen, his gaze locked on Eleanor, a mixture of fury, disbelief, and perhaps a flicker of something that might have been regret, warring in his eyes. Then, with a curt nod, he turned on his heel and strode back into the ballroom, Charlotte hurrying after him, her crimson gown a flash of colour in the dim light. The sound of their departure, the murmur of shocked whispers from guests who had witnessed the confrontation, faded into the background. Lord Pembroke turned to Eleanor and Elias, his stern expression softening slightly. "Lady Eleanor, Dr. Reed, I apologize for that unpleasant scene. Mrs. Hartwell has apprised me of your situation. I want you to know that you have my full support." "Dr. Reed's work is invaluable. And Lady Eleanor, from what I have observed this evening, you are a woman of intelligence and character. Do not let the Duke's bluster intimidate you." He glanced at Agatha. "Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps you should take your niece home. She has had quite enough excitement for one evening." Agatha nodded, moving to Eleanor's side and taking her arm. "Come, my dear," she said gently. "Let us leave this place." She glanced at Elias, a warm, approving smile on her face. "Doctor, Reed, I trust we shall see you soon. Elias bowed. Indeed, Mrs. Hartwell. Lady Eleanor. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes filled with concern and unwavering devotion. Are you all right? Eleanor, still trembling from the confrontation, managed a shaky smile. I think so, Elias. Thank you for everything. She wanted to say more, to express the depth of her gratitude, her love, her fear, but words failed her. She simply held his gaze for a long moment, a silent communication passing between them, a promise, a hope. As Agatha led her away, back through the ballroom, now buzzing with whispered speculation, and out to their waiting carriage, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of emotions, fear, exhilaration, defiance, and above all, a profound sense of liberation. She had confronted the Duke. She had spoken her truth. She had declared her love for Elias, publicly, irrevocably. The consequences would be severe, she knew. The scandal would be immense. But for the first time in her life, she had chosen her own path, had claimed her own voice. The war of hearts had reached a turning point, and Eleanor, the once invisible, underestimated pawn, had emerged as a force to be reckoned with. What would the Duke do now? And more importantly, what would she and Elias do next? The future was uncertain, fraught with danger, but it was finally, truly, her own. The carriage ride back to Bloomsbury passed in a tense, heavy silence. Eleanor sat rigidly beside Aunt Agatha, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Exhilaration at having finally spoken her truth, terror at the consequences that would surely follow, and a fierce, burning love for Elias that refused to be extinguished despite the impossibility of their situation. Agatha, ever perceptive, did not press her niece with questions or platitudes. She simply sat beside her, a solid, reassuring presence, occasionally patting Eleanor's hand in silent support. When they arrived at the townhouse, Mrs. Davies was waiting, her cheerful expression faltering as she took in Eleanor's pale, strained face. "Oh, my lady," she murmured sympathetically, "shall I prepare some tea, or perhaps a tisane to help you sleep?" "Tea, please, Mrs. Davies," Agatha said briskly, guiding Eleanor into the drawing-room and settling her into a chair near the fireplace, though no fire burned on this warm summer night. "And perhaps some brandy as well. I suspect we shall both need it." Once Mrs. Davies had departed, Agatha poured 2 generous measures of brandy from the decanter on the sideboard, pressing 1 glass into Eleanor's trembling hands. "Drink," she commanded gently. "It will steady your nerves." Eleanor obeyed, the fiery liquid burning a path down her throat, bringing a welcome warmth to her chilled limbs. She took a shaky breath, then another, feeling the immediate shock of the confrontation beginning to recede, replaced by a dawning realization of the enormity of what had just transpired. "Aunt Agatha," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "what have I done? The Duke, he will never forgive this. My family, oh God, my family, they will be ruined, utterly ruined. And it is all my fault." Agatha settled into the chair opposite, her own glass of brandy cradled in her hands, her grey eyes fixed on Eleanor with a mixture of concern and fierce pride. "You have done," she said firmly, "what you should have done weeks ago, months ago, perhaps even years ago. You have claimed your own voice, your own agency, your own right to choose your own destiny. Yes, there will be consequences, severe consequences, undoubtedly. But Eleanor, my dear, you cannot live your entire life as a sacrifice on the altar of your family's mistakes and society's expectations. You are a person, a woman with thoughts, feelings, desires, and rights. You deserve happiness, genuine happiness, not a gilded cage and a loveless marriage to a man who views you as property." "But my parents," Eleanor protested, tears welling in her eyes once more. "They depend upon this marriage. Without it, they will lose everything. The scandal of a broken betrothal, especially after tonight, it will destroy them. How can I be so selfish? Agatha leaned forward, her expression softening but her voice remaining resolute. Eleanor, listen to me carefully. Your parents' situation, while dire, is not entirely of their own making, but neither is it entirely yours to fix. Your brother's recklessness created this mess. Your parents' decision to sacrifice you to salvage their reputation was their choice, not yours. You did not ask to be born into this family, nor did you ask to be used as a pawn in their desperate gamble for social redemption. She paused, taking a sip of her brandy. I love my sister, your mother, dearly, but she has been complicit in this, Eleanor. She has allowed societal pressure and fear to override her maternal instincts, to prioritize reputation over your well-being. That is not your fault, and it is not your responsibility to martyr yourself for their mistakes. Eleanor stared at her aunt, her words sinking in slowly, challenging the deeply ingrained beliefs that had governed her entire life: duty, obedience, self-sacrifice. Could Agatha be right? Could she truly claim her own happiness without being consumed by guilt? But what can I do, Aunt Agatha? She asked, her voice small and lost. Even if I refuse to marry the Duke, where can I go? What can I do? I have no money of my own, no skills, no means of supporting myself. I would be utterly dependent, a burden upon you, or worse, forced to return to my parents in disgrace. A slow, knowing smile spread across Agatha's face, a glint of mischief and determination sparking in her eyes. Ah, my dear Eleanor, that is where you are mistaken. You do have options, perhaps not conventional options, and certainly not easy ones, but options nonetheless. She set down her brandy glass and leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Firstly, you are not, and will never be, a burden upon me. You are my niece, and I love you dearly. You are welcome to stay in this house for as long as you wish, indefinitely if necessary. I have more than sufficient means to support us both comfortably. But, Aunt Agatha, I cannot simply live off your charity for the rest of my life, Eleanor protested weakly. It is not charity, it is family, Agatha corrected firmly. But more to the point, you would not be living off my charity. You are intelligent, educated, and possess skills that are valuable, even if society has taught you to undervalue them. You read, you write, you speak French fluently. You have a keen understanding of literature and history. There are opportunities for women, Eleanor, particularly in London. Not grand, aristocratic opportunities, perhaps, but honest, respectable work. You could become a governess, a companion to an elderly lady, a teacher in a girls' school. You could even, with some training, assist me in my charitable work, managing correspondence, organizing events. These are not positions of great wealth or status, but they offer independence, dignity, and the ability to support oneself. Eleanor listened, a flicker of hope igniting within her. She had never considered such possibilities, had been raised to believe that a woman of her class had only two options: marriage or spinsterhood as a dependent relative. The idea of working, of earning her own living, was both daunting and strangely exhilarating. But the scandal, she said, voicing her remaining fear. After tonight, after what the Duke witnessed, after what surely everyone at that gala now knows, who would employ me? My reputation is in tatters. Agatha waved a dismissive hand. London is a large city, Eleanor, and the circles in which I move, the people I associate with, are not the same stuffy, judgmental aristocrats who populate your parents' world. Many of them are reformers, progressives, people who value character and ability over pedigree and reputation. Lord Pembroke's support tonight was significant. He is a man of immense influence, and his public defense of you will carry weight. Yes, there will be gossip, scandal, whispers. But there will also be people who admire your courage, who sympathize with your plight, who will be willing to offer you opportunities. She paused, her gaze holding Eleanor's. And then, of course, there is Dr. Reed. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat at the mention of his name, a warmth spreading through her chest. Elias, she whispered. Yes, Elias, Agatha repeated, her smile widening. A good man, Eleanor. A truly good man. He loves you, that much is abundantly clear. And you love him. That is a rare and precious thing, my dear. Do not throw it away lightly. She leaned forward again, her expression becoming more serious. Now, I am not suggesting you rush into anything precipitous. Marriage to Dr. Reed, while desirable from an emotional standpoint, would present its own challenges. He's not wealthy. His work is demanding and often dangerous, and you would be marrying significantly beneath your station, which would further alienate you from your family and much of society. But, she added, her voice softening, it would be a marriage built on love, respect and shared values. A partnership, Eleanor, not a transaction, and that, I believe, is worth far more than all the titles and fortunes in the world. Before Eleanor could respond, a sharp knock at the front door echoed through the quiet house. Both women started, exchanging surprised glances. It was well past midnight, an unseemly hour for visitors. Mrs. Davies, who had retired to her quarters, did not appear. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Agatha rose, her brow furrowed with concern. Who on earth could that be at this hour? She moved towards the hallway, Eleanor following close behind, her heart pounding with a mixture of apprehension and a strange, irrational hope. Agatha opened the door cautiously, peering out into the dimly lit street. Standing on the doorstep, his face etched with worry and determination, was Dr. Elias Reed. He was still dressed in his evening attire, though his cravat was loosened and his hair dishevelled as if he had been running. "Mrs. Hartwell, Lady Eleanor," he said breathlessly, "forgive the intrusion at such a late hour. I had to come. I had to see that Eleanor was safe, that she was all right." His gaze moved past Agatha, locking onto Eleanor. His hazel eyes filled with such intense concern and love that it took her breath away. Agatha, after a moment's hesitation, stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Dr. Reed, come in. Come in. You look as though you've run halfway across London. Mrs. Davies has retired, but I can make fresh tea, or perhaps you would prefer brandy." "Brandy would be most welcome, thank you, Mrs. Hartwell," Elias said, stepping into the hallway, his gaze never leaving Eleanor. Agatha, with a knowing smile and a tactful understanding, gestured towards the drawing room. "Go on, both of you. I shall fetch the brandy and give you a few moments of privacy. But only a few moments, mind you. Propriety must be observed, even in unconventional households." She bustled off towards the kitchen, leaving Eleanor and Elias alone in the dimly lit drawing room. For a moment, they simply stood there, staring at each other, the events of the evening hanging heavy in the air between them. Then, with a choked sob, Eleanor rushed forward, and Elias caught her in his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She buried her face in his shoulder, her body trembling, tears soaking into the fine fabric of his coat. He stroked her hair gently, murmuring soothing words, his own voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry, Eleanor," he whispered against her hair. "I am so sorry you had to endure that. I should have been more careful, should have anticipated. I never meant to put you in such a position." Eleanor pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her tear-streaked face illuminated by the soft glow of the gas lamps. "No, Elias," she said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. "You have nothing to apologize for. I am not sorry. I am not sorry for loving you, for kissing you, for telling the Duke the truth. I am only sorry that it took me so long to find the courage to do so." She reached up, cupping his face in her hands, her thumbs gently tracing the line of his jaw. "I love you, Elias Reed, and I will not marry the Duke. I cannot. I will not spend my life in a loveless marriage, trapped in a gilded cage, when I have found true love, true happiness with you." Elias's eyes widened, a mixture of hope and disbelief flooding his features. "Eleanor, are you certain? The consequences, your family, your reputation, your future, it will all be jeopardized. I have so little to offer you. A modest income, a small house, a life of hard work and uncertainty. It is nothing compared to what the Duke could provide. It is everything Eleanor interrupted, her voice ringing with conviction. "It is love, Elias. It is respect, partnership, shared purpose. It is a life lived on my own terms, with a man I love and admire with all my heart. That is worth more than all the Duke's wealth and titles combined." She paused, taking a deep, steadying breath. "Aunt Agatha has offered me refuge, a place to stay, and she believes there are opportunities for me, ways I can support myself, earn my own living. I will not be a burden upon anyone. And if you still wish it, if you still want me, despite the scandal, despite my lack of fortune, then I would be honored to be your wife, Elias. Not now, not immediately, but someday, when the dust has settled, when I have proven to myself and to the world that I'm capable of standing on my own 2 feet. Elias stared at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears, his face a portrait of overwhelming emotion, joy, relief, love, and a fierce, protective determination. "If I still wish it," he repeated, his voice choked. "Eleanor, there is nothing in this world I want more than to spend my life with you. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. Your courage, your intelligence, your compassion, you humble me. I will work every day of my life to be worthy of you, to provide for you, to make you happy." He pulled her close again, his lips finding hers, in a kiss that was deeper, more passionate than their first. A kiss that sealed their commitment, their defiant choice to forge their own path together against all odds. They broke apart reluctantly as Agatha's footsteps sounded in the hallway. She entered the drawing room, carrying a tray with a fresh decanter of brandy and 3 glasses, her expression one of carefully controlled amusement and satisfaction. "Well," she said briskly, setting down the tray, "I trust you two have had a productive conversation." She poured 3 generous measures of brandy, handing one to each of them. "Aunt Agatha," Eleanor said, her voice trembling with emotion, but also with a newfound strength, "I have decided. I will not marry the Duke. I am breaking the betrothal, and Elias and I, we wish to be together. We wish to marry eventually when circumstances permit." Agatha raised her glass, a wide, approving smile spreading across her face. "I am delighted to hear it, my dear, absolutely delighted. To Eleanor and Elias," she declared, "to courage, to love, and to choosing one's own destiny, may you both find all the happiness you deserve." They clinked glasses, the sound a bright, hopeful chime in the quiet room, a toast to a future uncertain but freely chosen. The following days were a maelstrom of activity and anxiety. Eleanor, with Agatha's unwavering support and Elias's constant encouragement, penned a formal letter to the Duke, breaking their betrothal. The letter was carefully worded, polite but firm, stating simply that she could not, in good conscience, enter into a marriage where genuine affection and mutual respect were absent. She did not mention Elias by name, did not offer detailed explanations or justifications. She simply stated her decision and requested that the Duke respect it. The letter was dispatched by messenger, and then there was nothing to do but wait. The Duke's response arrived 2 days later, delivered not by a polite messenger, but by his solicitor, a stern, grey-haired man named Mr. Blackwood, who arrived at Agatha's townhouse with an air of grim formality. He was shown into the drawing-room, where Eleanor, Agatha, and Elias, who had taken to spending most of his free hours at the townhouse, offering his support, awaited him. Mr. Blackwood wasted no time on pleasantries. He opened his leather satchel and extracted a sheaf of documents, laying them on the table with a decisive thud. "Lady Eleanor," he began, his voice dry and disapproving, "His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth, is deeply displeased by your precipitous decision. He views your actions as a breach of contract, a violation of honor, and a public humiliation. He has instructed me to inform you of the following consequences." He consulted his documents, his tone becoming even more formal and legalistic. "Firstly, the betrothal contract, signed by your father, Lord Beaumont, included significant financial considerations. A substantial sum was advanced to your family upon the announcement of the betrothal, intended to alleviate certain debts. His Grace now demands the immediate return of this sum in full, with interest." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. She knew her family had received money from the Duke, but she had not realized the extent of it, nor the legal implications. "How much?" she whispered. Mr. Blackwood named a sum that made Eleanor gasp, a sum so large it was utterly impossible for her family to repay. It would mean the complete and utter ruin of the Beaumonts, the loss of their estate, their remaining possessions, everything. Lord Beaumont would likely face debtor's prison. "That is extortion," Elias exclaimed, his voice sharp with anger. "The Duke is using financial leverage to force Lady Eleanor into a marriage against her will. That is unconscionable." Mr. Blackwood turned his cold gaze on Elias, his expression one of disdain. "Dr. Reed, I presume. His Grace is well aware of your involvement in this matter. I would advise you to remain silent. This is a legal matter between His Grace and the Beaumont family. Your opinions are neither sought nor relevant." He turned back to Eleanor. "Secondly, His Grace intends to pursue legal action for breach of contract. He will seek damages, not only financial but also for the injury to his reputation and social standing caused by your public rejection. This will be a protracted and very public legal battle, Lady Eleanor, one that will further damage your family's already tarnished name." Agatha, who had been listening with a growing expression of outrage, finally spoke, her voice icy and controlled. "Mr. Blackwood, you may inform His Grace that his threats are noted. However, I would remind him and you that contracts signed under duress, or contracts that involve the coercion of a young woman into a marriage against her will, are not always upheld by the courts, particularly when the circumstances are made public. His Grace's own behaviour, his relationship with Miss Charlotte Ashford, his silence during Lady Eleanor's public humiliation at her own betrothal dinner, these are all matters that could be brought to light in any legal proceedings. I suspect His Grace would find such public scrutiny uncomfortable." Mr. Blackwood's expression flickered, a hint of uncertainty crossing his stern features. Agatha had struck a nerve. The Duke's reputation, while powerful, was not unassailable. A public trial, with all its sordid details aired in open court, could indeed damage him significantly. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said stiffly, "I am merely conveying His Grace's position. I would advise Lady Eleanor to reconsider her decision most carefully. The consequences of defying His Grace are severe. The consequences of marrying him would be far more severe," Eleanor said quietly, finding her voice, her resolve hardening. "I will not be intimidated, Mr. Blackwood. I will not be forced into a marriage I do not want. Tell the Duke that my decision is final, and tell him that I wish him well, but I will not sacrifice my happiness, my very soul, for his pride or my family's financial security." Mr. Blackwood gathered his documents, his expression one of disapproval and frustration. "Very well, Lady Eleanor. I shall convey your message to His Grace, but I warn you, this is not over. His Grace is not a man accustomed to being defied." With a curt bow, he departed, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Eleanor sank into a chair, her legs trembling, the weight of the Duke's threats pressing down upon her. "My family," she whispered, her voice filled with anguish. "He will destroy them. He will take everything." Elias knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "We will find a way, Eleanor," he said fiercely. "We will not let him win. There must be something we can do." Agatha paced the room, her mind clearly working furiously. "The Duke is bluffing, at least partially," she said thoughtfully. "A public trial would damage him as much as it would damage Eleanor and her family. He is hoping to intimidate her into submission, but we need leverage. Something to counter his threats." She paused, turning to face them. "I have connections, Eleanor, people who owe me favors, people with influence. Let me make some inquiries. There may be ways to mitigate the damage, to negotiate a settlement that does not involve your marriage or your family's complete ruin. Over the following week, Agatha worked tirelessly, calling in favors, meeting with influential friends, consulting with her own solicitor. Eleanor, meanwhile, received a heartbreaking letter from her mother, filled with recriminations, pleas, and desperate fear. Lady Beaumont begged Eleanor to reconsider, to return to the Duke, to save the family from ruin. The letter was a knife to Eleanor's heart, but she held firm, bolstered by Elias's unwavering support and Agatha's fierce determination. And then, unexpectedly, a breakthrough came, not from Agatha's efforts, but from an entirely unforeseen source. A message arrived at the townhouse requesting a private meeting with Eleanor. The sender was Miss Charlotte Ashford. Eleanor was stunned. Why would Charlotte, her rival, the woman who had publicly humiliated her, wish to meet? Agatha was immediately suspicious, warning Eleanor that it could be a trap, another attempt by the Duke to manipulate her. But Eleanor, driven by a desperate hope that perhaps Charlotte held some key to resolving this impossible situation, agreed to the meeting, insisting that it take place at Agatha's townhouse, with Agatha present. Charlotte arrived the following afternoon, dressed in a somber gown of grey silk, her golden hair simply styled, her expression, for once, devoid of its usual triumphant smirk. She looked, Eleanor realized with surprise, tired, even vulnerable. She was shown into the drawing room, where Eleanor and Agatha awaited her, both women tense and wary. "Lady Eleanor, Mrs. Hartwell," Charlotte began, her voice lacking its usual honeyed confidence. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I know you have no reason to trust me, and I do not blame you." She paused, twisting her gloved hands nervously. "I have come to apologize, and to offer you information that may be of use." Eleanor and Agatha exchanged surprised glances. An apology from Charlotte Ashford was the last thing either of them had expected. "An apology?" Eleanor repeated cautiously. "For what, precisely, Miss Ashford?" Charlotte took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to her hands. "For my behavior at your betrothal dinner, for my outburst at the gala, for everything. I was cruel, vindictive, and utterly selfish. I allowed my own jealousy and thwarted ambitions to blind me to the harm I was causing." She looked up, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly, and for the first time Eleanor saw genuine remorse in her blue eyes. "The truth is, Lady Eleanor, I was in love with the Duke, or rather, I convinced myself I was. He was kind to me after my sister died, gave me a home, a position, a sense of purpose. I misinterpreted his kindness, his reliance on me as something more. I believed foolishly that he would eventually marry me. When he announced his betrothal to you, I was devastated, furious. I wanted to hurt you, to ruin your happiness, because I could not bear my own disappointment." "And now?" Agatha asked, her tone still skeptical but less hostile. "What has changed, Miss Ashford?" Charlotte's expression hardened slightly, a flicker of her old bitterness returning. "What has changed is that I have finally seen the Duke for what he truly is. Not the grieving widower, not the benevolent patron, but a cold, calculating man who uses people for his own ends and discards them when they are no longer useful." She paused, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "After the gala, after you fled, Lady Eleanor, the Duke was furious. But his fury was not directed at Dr. Reed, nor even primarily at you. It was directed at me. He blamed me for the scene, for exposing his arrangement with me, for jeopardizing his carefully constructed image. He dismissed me from Ashworth Hall, Lady Eleanor, cast me out with barely a word of explanation, as if I were a servant who had displeased him. He gave me a small sum of money and told me to leave London, to disappear, to never speak of our association again." Eleanor felt a pang of unexpected sympathy for Charlotte. Despite everything the woman had done, she too had been used, manipulated, and ultimately discarded by the Duke. "I am sorry, Miss Ashford," Eleanor said quietly. "That must have been very difficult." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back fiercely. It was humiliating, and it opened my eyes. The Duke does not love anyone, Lady Eleanor. He is incapable of it. He views people as possessions, as tools to enhance his own power and prestige. You were to be his perfect duchess, a beautiful, well-bred ornament to display. I was to be his discreet companion, managing his household and warming his bed when convenient. Neither of us mattered to him as individuals, only as fulfillments of roles he had assigned. She took a shaky breath. I have come to tell you this, Lady Eleanor, because you deserve to know the truth, and because I have information that may help you break free from him. Agatha leaned forward, her interest piqued. What kind of information, Miss Ashford? Charlotte reached into her reticule and extracted a folded piece of paper, placing it on the table between them. The Duke's first wife, my sister, Lady Catherine. Her death was ruled an accident. She fell down the grand staircase at Ashworth Hall, broke her neck. It was a tragedy, everyone said. The Duke was devastated, everyone said. She paused, her voice dropping to a chilling whisper. But I was there, Lady Eleanor. I lived in that house. And I know things. I know that Catherine was unhappy, desperately unhappy. The Duke was controlling, possessive, jealous. He monitored her every move, dictated her every action. She felt trapped, suffocated. She confided in me, told me she was planning to leave him, to seek a separation, scandalous as that would have been. Charlotte's gaze was intense, boring into Eleanor's. And then she died, conveniently, before she could act on her plans. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine, a cold dread settling in her stomach. Are you suggesting the Duke had something to do with your sister's death? Charlotte's expression was grim. I am suggesting that the circumstances were suspicious. There were no witnesses. The Duke claimed he was in his study at the time, but the servants whispered. They said they heard arguing that night, raised voices coming from the upper floors. They said Catherine seemed frightened in the days before her death. Nothing was ever proven, of course. The Duke is too powerful, too well connected. The inquest was brief, the verdict swift, accidental death. She tapped the folded paper on the table. This is a letter, Lady Eleanor. A letter Catherine wrote to me just days before she died. She never sent it. I found it hidden among her belongings after her death. In it, she details the Duke's controlling behavior, his rages, her fear of him. She explicitly states her intention to leave him. This letter, if made public, would cast serious doubt on the official account of her death. It would raise questions, create scandal, damage the Duke's reputation irreparably. Agatha picked up the letter, unfolding it carefully, her eyes scanning the faded ink. Her expression grew increasingly grave as she read. When she finished, she looked up at Charlotte, then at Eleanor. This is explosive, Miss Ashford. If this is genuine, and if it were to become public knowledge, it would indeed be devastating for the Duke. It is genuine, Charlotte said firmly. I have kept it hidden all these years, unsure what to do with it, afraid of the Duke's power. But now I want him to pay. For what he did to Catherine, for what he did to me, and for what he is trying to do to you, Lady Eleanor. She looked directly at Eleanor, her expression earnest. Use this letter. Use it as leverage. Threaten to make it public if he does not release you from the betrothal and drop his financial demands against your family. He will not risk the scandal, the investigation, the potential criminal charges. He will back down. Eleanor stared at the letter in Agatha's hands, her mind reeling. Could it be true? Could the Duke, the cold, controlling man she had been betrothed to, be capable of murder? The thought was horrifying, yet chillingly plausible, given what she now knew of his character. "Why are you doing this, Miss Ashford?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Why are you helping me after everything?" Charlotte's expression softened, a flicker of genuine remorse crossing her features. "Because I was wrong, Lady Eleanor. Wrong to hate you. Wrong to try to destroy you. You are innocent in all of this, a victim of circumstance and the Duke's machinations, just as Catherine was, just as I was. And because—" she paused, her voice trembling slightly—"because perhaps, in some small way, helping you escape him is a way of atoning for my own sins and of finally getting justice for my sister." Agatha folded the letter carefully, her expression thoughtful. "This is a powerful weapon, Miss Ashford, but it is also a dangerous one. If we use it, we must be prepared for the Duke's retaliation. He will not go quietly." "He will have no choice," Charlotte said firmly. "The threat of public exposure, of a potential murder investigation, will be enough. He values his reputation, his power, above all else. He will not risk losing it." She rose to her feet, preparing to leave. "I have given you the weapon, Lady Eleanor. The choice of whether and how to use it is yours. I wish you well, truly." With a final, almost respectful nod, Charlotte Ashford departed, leaving Eleanor and Agatha alone with the damning letter and a glimmer of hope, however dark and dangerous its source. The decision was agonizing, but ultimately inevitable. Eleanor, with Agatha's counsel and Elias's unwavering support, decided to use Charlotte's letter. Agatha's solicitor drafted a carefully worded message to the Duke, delivered by a trusted messenger. The message was brief and to the point. Lady Eleanor Beaumont was breaking the betrothal, final and irrevocable. All financial demands against the Beaumont family were to be dropped immediately. In return, certain sensitive information regarding the late Duchess of Ashworth would remain private. Failure to comply would result in said information being delivered to the authorities and made public. The response came within 24 hours, not from the Duke himself, but from Mr. Blackwood, his solicitor. The message was terse, formal, and laced with barely suppressed fury. His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth, agreed to the terms. The betrothal was dissolved. All financial claims against the Beaumont family were withdrawn. The matter was closed. There would be no further communication. Eleanor read the message, her hands trembling, tears of relief streaming down her face. It was over. She was free. Truly, finally free. The Duke had backed down, his pride and his secrets more valuable to him than his revenge. She collapsed into Elias's arms, sobbing with a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and overwhelming gratitude. The scandal, of course, was immense. The broken betrothal between Lady Eleanor Beaumont and the Duke of Ashworth became the talk of London society for weeks. Whispers and speculation ran rampant, fueled by the dramatic confrontation at the Pembroke Gala and the mysterious, sudden dissolution of the engagement. Eleanor's reputation was indeed tarnished, her name spoken in hushed, scandalized tones in drawing rooms across the city, but she found, to her surprise, that she did not care. The opinions of people who valued reputation over character, who prioritized social standing over genuine human connection, no longer held any power over her. Her parents, initially devastated and furious, eventually grudgingly accepted her decision, relieved at least that they were spared financial ruin. The relationship remained strained, distant, but Eleanor had made her peace with it. She had chosen her own path, and she would live with the consequences, whatever they might be. With Agatha's help and connections, Eleanor secured a position as a teacher at a small progressive girls' school in Bloomsbury, run by a formidable but kind-hearted woman named Miss Penelope Thorne, a friend of Agatha's and a fellow advocate for women's education. The work was demanding but deeply fulfilling. Eleanor discovered a passion for teaching, for nurturing young minds, for empowering girls to think critically and aspire to lives beyond the narrow confines of traditional domesticity. She earned a modest salary, enough to contribute to her own upkeep and to feel, for the first time in her life, truly independent. And through it all, Elias was by her side. Their courtship, conducted with propriety and discretion under Agatha's watchful eye, deepened into a profound and abiding love. He continued his work at the hospital, his dedication to serving the poor unwavering. She supported his work, attended lectures with him, engaged in passionate discussions about social reform and the future they hoped to build together. 6 months after the broken betrothal, on a crisp autumn day, in a small, quiet ceremony attended only by Aunt Agatha, a few close friends from Agatha's salon, and Miss Thorne from the school, Eleanor Beaumont became Mrs. Elias Reed. There was no grand cathedral, no elaborate reception, no aristocratic guests. But there was love, genuine, deep and freely given. There was respect, partnership and shared purpose. And there was happiness, a quiet, profound happiness that Eleanor had never imagined possible. As she stood beside Elias, her hand clasped in his, exchanging vows in the simple chapel, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. She had chosen love over duty, freedom over security, her own authentic life over a gilded cage. And in doing so, she had finally truly found herself. The war of hearts was over, and Eleanor had emerged victorious, not through conquest, but through the courage to claim her own destiny. The small house on Marchmont Street, tucked away in a quiet corner of Bloomsbury, was a world away from the grand estates and sprawling manors Eleanor had known in her former life. It was a narrow 3-story terrace house of red brick, modest in size and unpretentious in appearance, with a tiny front garden where Eleanor had planted roses, lavender and cheerful marigolds that bloomed defiantly against the soot-stained London air. The interior was simply furnished with pieces acquired from second-hand shops and generous gifts from Aunt Agatha. A comfortable sofa covered in faded chintz, a sturdy oak dining table, bookshelves overflowing with volumes on medicine, literature, philosophy and social reform, and a cosy kitchen where Eleanor had learned, with considerable trial and error and patient instruction from Mrs. Davies, to cook simple but nourishing meals. It was not grand, it was not fashionable, but it was theirs, truly, completely theirs. And Eleanor loved it with a fierce, protective passion she had never felt for Ashworth Manor or even her childhood home. This house represented everything she had fought for: independence, choice, love freely given and received, a life built on shared values rather than inherited privilege. Every creaking floorboard, every slightly crooked picture frame, every chipped teacup held a story, a memory, a testament to the life she and Elias were building together, brick by modest brick. It was now late spring, nearly a year since Eleanor had fled the disastrous betrothal dinner, 9 months since she had broken free from the Duke's suffocating grasp, and 6 months since she had become Mrs. Elias Reed. The transformation in her life, in her very being, was profound. The pale, anxious, dutiful girl, who had once sat silently in drawing rooms, embroidering lifeless flowers and dreaming of escape, had blossomed into a woman of purpose, confidence, and quiet strength. Her days were full, demanding, and deeply satisfying in ways she had never imagined possible. Each morning, Eleanor rose early, often before dawn, to prepare breakfast for Elias before he departed for the hospital. He worked long, grueling hours, often returning home exhausted, his clothes stained, his face etched with the weariness of witnessing suffering he could not always alleviate. But his eyes still held that spark of compassion, that unwavering determination to make a difference, and Eleanor loved him all the more for it. She would greet him at the door, help him out of his coat, pour him a glass of ale or a cup of strong tea, and listen as he recounted the events of his day, the patients he had saved, the ones he had lost, the small victories and the heartbreaking defeats. She offered comfort, encouragement, and a perspective informed by her own growing understanding of the social issues that contributed to the suffering he witnessed daily. After Elias departed for the hospital, Eleanor would prepare herself for her own work. She taught at Miss Thorne's Academy for Young Ladies 3 days a week, instructing girls aged 12 to 16 in literature, history, and French. Miss Thorne's academy was unlike any school Eleanor had attended or even heard of in her previous life. It was not designed to produce accomplished young ladies skilled in needlework, watercolors, and the art of polite conversation. It was designed to educate young women, to equip them with knowledge, critical thinking skills, and the confidence to pursue lives of purpose and independence, whether through marriage, profession, or social contribution. Miss Thorne herself was a formidable woman in her 50s, a lifelong spinster by choice, a passionate advocate for women's suffrage and educational reform, and a brilliant educator who demanded excellence from both her students and her staff. Eleanor thrived in this environment. She discovered a natural talent for teaching, a genuine joy in witnessing the intellectual awakening of her students, in challenging them to question assumptions, to think critically, to see beyond the narrow confines of societal expectations. She taught them not just the facts of history, but the stories of women who had defied convention, who had fought for their rights, who had made significant contributions to society despite the obstacles placed in their path. She taught them literature not as a mere accomplishment, but as a window into the human condition, a source of empathy, understanding, and inspiration. And she taught them French not just as a social grace, but as a key to accessing a wider world of ideas and culture. Her students, initially wary of this new teacher with her unconventional background and her earnest, passionate teaching style, quickly grew to adore her. They saw in Mrs. Reed a woman who practiced what she preached, who had chosen her own path, who had defied societal expectations to pursue love and purpose. She was a living example of the possibilities that lay before them, a beacon of hope in a world that often sought to limit their aspirations. Eleanor, in turn, found immense fulfillment in their progress, their curiosity, their growing confidence. She was not merely teaching them facts, she was helping to shape their minds, their characters, their futures. It was work that mattered, work that made a difference, and it filled her with a sense of purpose she had never experienced in her former life, of idle accomplishment and enforced domesticity. On the days she did not teach, Eleanor assisted Aunt Agatha with her charitable work. Agatha, ever energetic and committed to social reform, was involved in numerous causes, supporting orphanages, advocating for better working conditions in factories, raising funds for hospitals and schools in impoverished neighborhoods. Eleanor helped with correspondence, organized fundraising events, visited charitable institutions, and gradually became deeply involved in the work herself. She saw firsthand the poverty, the suffering, the injustice that plagued London's poorest residents, the same suffering Elias witnessed daily in his medical practice. It was heartbreaking, often overwhelming, but it also ignited a fire within her, a determination to contribute, to use her education, her skills, and her newfound voice to advocate for those who had none. Through Agatha's connections and her own growing involvement in charitable work, Eleanor met other women, reformers, activists, writers, educators, who shared her values and her passion for social change. She attended meetings of the London Society for Women's Suffrage, initially as a curious observer, then as an increasingly engaged participant. She listened to passionate speeches advocating for women's right to vote, to own property, to pursue education and professions, to be recognized as full and equal citizens. These ideas, once radical and unthinkable to the sheltered girl she had been, now resonated deeply with her own experience, her own hard-won understanding of the limitations imposed upon women by law and custom. She began to see her own personal struggle, her fight to escape an arranged marriage, to claim her own agency, to choose her own destiny, as part of a much larger movement, a collective struggle for women's rights and equality. One evening, as Eleanor and Elias sat together in their small parlour after supper, Eleanor reading aloud from a pamphlet on women's suffrage while Elias reviewed medical journals, he looked up, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You are becoming quite the radical, Mrs. Reed," he said, a teasing smile playing on his lips, though his eyes held genuine admiration. Eleanor looked up from her pamphlet, returning his smile. "And you, Dr. Reed, are married to a radical. Does that concern you?" Elias set aside his journal and moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her hand in his. "Concern me? Quite the opposite. I am immensely proud of you, Eleanor. Proud of the woman you have become, proud of the work you are doing, proud of your courage and your convictions. You are making a difference in this world, a real, tangible difference that is far more valuable than any title or fortune." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I know this life is not what you were raised to expect. It is not easy, it is not luxurious, it is often challenging and uncertain. Do you ever regret your choice? Do you ever miss the life you left behind?" Eleanor looked at him, her twilight eyes filled with such profound love and contentment that it took his breath away. "Regret?" she repeated softly. "Elias, I have never been happier in my entire life. This house, this life, this work, you, this is everything I ever truly wanted, even when I did not know it was possible to want it. The life I left behind was a gilded cage, a beautiful prison where I was suffocating slowly day by day. This life, our life, is freedom. It is purpose, it is love, it is real." She squeezed his hand, her voice trembling with emotion. "I do not miss the grand estates, the elaborate gowns, the endless social obligations, the stifling expectations. I do not miss being treated as a decorative object, a pawn in someone else's game. I miss nothing about that life, Elias. Nothing. Because I have everything that truly matters right here with you." Elias pulled her into his arms, holding her close, his own eyes misting with emotion. "I love you, Eleanor Reed," he whispered against her hair, "more than words can ever express. You are my partner, my equal, my greatest joy. And I promise you, I will spend every day of my life working to be worthy of you, to build a life with you that is filled with love, purpose, and shared dreams." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece and the distant rumble of carriages on the street outside. Then Eleanor, a mischievous glint entering her eyes, pulled back slightly and looked at him. "Elias," she said, her voice taking on a tone of barely suppressed excitement, "I have something to tell you. Something wonderful." Elias looked at her, his brow furrowing with curiosity and a hint of concern. "What is it, my love? You look as though you're about to burst." Eleanor took a deep breath, her heart pounding with a mixture of joy and nervous anticipation. I have been feeling unwell these past few weeks. Nothing serious, just fatigue, a certain queasiness in the mornings. I thought perhaps I was simply working too hard, not getting enough rest. But then I began to suspect, and today I went to see Dr. Ashworth, the lady physician Aunt Agatha recommended. Do you remember? She paused, watching his face, seeing the dawning realization in his eyes. "Elias, I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment Elias simply stared at her, his expression frozen in shock. Then slowly a smile spread across his face, a smile so wide, so radiant, so filled with overwhelming joy that it transformed his entire countenance. "A baby," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Eleanor, truly, we are going to be parents?" Eleanor nodded, tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, Elias, truly. In the autumn, Dr. Ashworth believes, we are going to have a baby." Elias let out a whoop of joy, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around, laughing and crying at the same time. He set her down gently, as if she were suddenly made of the most fragile porcelain, his hands cradling her face, his eyes searching hers. This is the most wonderful news, Eleanor, the most incredible, miraculous news. A baby, our baby." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, his joy overflowing. "I am going to be a father, and you, my darling, brilliant, courageous wife, are going to be a mother, Our child will be so loved, so cherished, so fortunate to have you." The months that followed were filled with preparation, anticipation, and a deepening sense of shared purpose. Eleanor continued to teach at Miss Thorne's academy as long as she was able, finally taking leave in late summer as her pregnancy advanced. Elias, ever protective and devoted, fussed over her constantly, ensuring she rested, ate well, and did not overexert herself. Aunt Agatha was overjoyed at the news, immediately taking charge of acquiring baby clothes, linens, and all manner of necessities, transforming the small spare room in the Marchmont Street house into a cozy nursery. Mrs. Davies, who had become a frequent visitor and a beloved friend, knitted tiny blankets and booties with tireless enthusiasm. In early October, on a crisp golden autumn afternoon, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The labor was long and arduous, attended by Dr. Ashworth and a skilled midwife, with Elias pacing anxiously downstairs, forbidden by propriety from being present, but unable to stray far from his wife's side. When the midwife finally emerged, a tired but beaming smile on her face, and announced, "It's a girl, Dr. Reed, a beautiful, healthy girl, and Mrs. Reed is doing splendidly," Elias nearly collapsed with relief and overwhelming joy. He was allowed upstairs to see Eleanor, who lay exhausted but radiant in their bed, cradling a tiny, swaddled bundle in her arms. Her face was pale, her hair damp with perspiration, but her eyes shone with a love so profound, so all-encompassing, that it took Elias's breath away. "Elias," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with wonder, "come meet our daughter." Elias approached the bed slowly, reverently, as if approaching a sacred altar. He gazed down at the tiny infant in Eleanor's arms, a perfect miniature human being with a shock of dark hair, delicate features, and tiny, perfectly formed fingers that grasped reflexively at the air. Tears streamed down his face as he gently touched the baby's soft cheek, overwhelmed by a love so fierce, so protective, so utterly transformative that he felt as though his heart might burst. "She is perfect," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. Just like her mother." Eleanor smiled, tears of joy mingling with exhaustion on her cheeks. "What shall we name her, Elias?" They had discussed names endlessly over the past months, debating, considering, rejecting dozens of options. But now, looking at their daughter, the answer seemed obvious, inevitable. "Catherine," Elias said softly, "after your aunt's kindness and perhaps in some small way as a tribute to another Catherine, one who deserved a better fate, Catherine Agatha Reed. If you approve, my love." Eleanor looked down at her daughter, then back at Elias, her eyes shining with agreement and deep emotion. "Catherine Agatha Reed," she repeated softly. "It is perfect, Elias. Absolutely perfect. Welcome to the world, little Catherine. You are so loved, so very, very loved." The arrival of baby Catherine transformed their lives in ways both profound and utterly mundane. The small house on Marchmont Street, once quiet and orderly, became filled with the sounds of infant cries, coos, and gurgles. Sleepless nights became the norm, as did the endless cycle of feeding, changing, soothing, and marveling at every tiny milestone, the first smile, the first grasp of a finger, the first focused gaze. Eleanor, despite her exhaustion, had never felt more fulfilled, more complete. Motherhood, she discovered, was both the most challenging and the most rewarding role she had ever undertaken. It demanded everything: her time, her energy, her patience, her very being. Yet it gave back a love so pure, so unconditional, so transformative that it made every sacrifice worthwhile. Elias, despite his demanding work at the hospital, was a devoted and hands-on father. He would rush home whenever his schedule permitted, eager to hold his daughter, to sing to her in his slightly off-key baritone, to simply gaze at her with an expression of such profound love and wonder that it made Eleanor's heart swell. He changed nappies without complaint, walked the floor with Catherine during colicky nights, and read to her from medical journals and poetry volumes alike, convinced that even an infant could benefit from exposure to language and learning. Aunt Agatha was a frequent and doting visitor, showering Catherine with gifts and affection, declaring her to be the most intelligent and beautiful baby ever born. A pronouncement Eleanor and Elias, besotted parents that they were, wholeheartedly agreed with. As Catherine grew from a tiny newborn into a plump, alert infant, Eleanor gradually resumed some of her activities. She returned to teaching at Miss Thorne's academy on a part-time basis, bringing Catherine with her on occasion, the baby becoming a beloved fixture in the school, cooed over by students and staff alike. She continued her charitable work with Aunt Agatha, attending meetings, organizing events, and advocating for causes she believed in, now with the added perspective and urgency of a mother who wanted to build a better world for her daughter. She and Elias hosted small gatherings at their home, inviting friends from Agatha's salon, colleagues from the hospital, fellow teachers and reformers, creating a vibrant intellectual community centered around their modest parlor, where ideas were debated, causes championed, and friendships deepened over simple meals and shared laughter. One crisp winter afternoon, nearly a year after Catherine's birth, Eleanor sat in the small front garden of their Marchmont Street house, wrapped in a warm shawl, watching as Catherine, now a sturdy toddler with her father's dark hair and her mother's twilight eyes, toddled unsteadily across the small patch of grass, chasing a brightly coloured ball with shrieks of delighted laughter. The roses Eleanor had planted were dormant now, their branches bare against the grey winter sky, but the promise of spring, of renewal, of new blooms was already present in the swelling buds. Eleanor felt a deep sense of peace, of contentment, of profound gratitude for the life she had built, the choices she had made, the love she had found. She thought back, as she often did, to that terrified, trapped girl she had been just 2 years prior, sitting in the drawing room of Ashworth Manor, embroidering lifeless flowers and dreading her impending marriage to the Duke. That girl seemed like a stranger now, a ghost from another lifetime. So much had changed, so much had been lost, her family's full acceptance, her place in society, the security and privilege of her former life. But so much more had been gained. Freedom, purpose, genuine love, a partnership built on equality and shared values, a daughter who represented hope and possibility, a life lived on her own terms. A carriage pulled up in front of the house, and Eleanor looked up, surprised. They were not expecting visitors. A footman descended and opened the carriage door, and to Eleanor's utter astonishment, a familiar figure emerged. Lady Beaumont, her mother. Eleanor had not seen her mother in over a year, their relationship strained and distant since the broken betrothal. Occasional stiff letters had been exchanged, but no visits, no reconciliation. Eleanor's heart began to pound as her mother approached the garden gate, her expression unreadable, her elegant travelling cloak and bonnet a stark contrast to Eleanor's simple day dress and worn shawl. "Mother," Eleanor said, rising to her feet, her voice uncertain, guarded. "This is unexpected." Lady Beaumont paused at the gate, her gaze sweeping over the modest house, the tiny garden, and then, finally, landing on Catherine, who had stopped her play and was staring at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. Lady Beaumont's expression softened, a flicker of emotion, surprise perhaps, or longing crossing her face. "Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I hope I'm not intruding. I should have written, should have sent word, but I found myself in London, and I could not stay away any longer." Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat, a mixture of old hurt, lingering resentment, and a tentative, fragile hope. "You are not intruding, Mother," she said quietly, opening the gate. "Please come in, it is cold, we can take tea." Lady Beaumont entered the garden, her gaze still fixed on Catherine. Is this my granddaughter?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice softening. This is Catherine, Catherine Agatha Reed. Catherine, darling, come here. This is your grandmother. Catherine, ever curious and surprisingly fearless, toddled towards Lady Beaumont, looking up at her with bright, inquisitive eyes. Lady Beaumont knelt down slowly, her elegant skirts pooling around her on the damp grass, and extended a tentative hand towards the child. Catherine, after a moment's hesitation, reached out and grasped her grandmother's finger, offering a shy, gap-toothed smile. Lady Beaumont's eyes filled with tears, and she let out a choked sob, pulling the child into a gentle embrace. "She is beautiful, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely beautiful. She has your eyes." Eleanor felt her own tears begin to fall, the walls of resentment and hurt she had built around her heart beginning to crumble. "Come inside, Mother," she said gently, helping her mother to her feet. "Please, let us talk." They went inside, into the small, warm parlour, where Eleanor prepared tea while Lady Beaumont sat stiffly on the sofa, Catherine playing contentedly at her feet with her toys. When Eleanor returned with the tea tray, an awkward silence descended. Finally, Lady Beaumont spoke, her voice hesitant, filled with regret. "Eleanor, I have come to apologize for everything. For the betrothal, for the pressure we placed upon you, for not listening to your feelings, for choosing our own fears and our own pride over your happiness and well-being. I was wrong, Eleanor. Your father and I were both wrong. We were so consumed by the scandal, by the fear of ruin, that we lost sight of what truly mattered. You, our daughter, your happiness, your future." Eleanor set down her teacup, her hands trembling. "Mother, Please let me finish," Lady Beaumont interrupted gently. "I need to say this. These past months, watching from afar, hearing whispers of your life, of your work, of your marriage to Dr. Reed, I have had much time to reflect, and I have come to realize that you were braver than I ever was, Eleanor. You chose love over duty, freedom over security, your own authentic life over the expectations of society, and you were right to do so. The Duke, we have heard things, Eleanor. Whispers, rumors about his first wife, about his character. Nothing proven, of course, but enough to make me realize that we were sending you into a situation that could have been dangerous, harmful. And I am profoundly grateful that you had the courage to refuse, even when we could not support you." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her cheeks, a lifetime of hurt and resentment beginning to dissolve in the face of her mother's genuine remorse. "I was so angry with you, Mother," she whispered, "so hurt. I felt betrayed, abandoned." "And you had every right to feel that way," Lady Beaumont said, reaching across and taking Eleanor's hand. "I failed you, Eleanor. As a mother, I failed you. But I am here now, asking for your forgiveness, asking for a chance to know you again, to know my granddaughter, to be part of your life, if you will allow it. I do not expect you to forget or to pretend that the past did not happen. But perhaps we can begin again, slowly, carefully." Eleanor looked at her mother, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes, the vulnerability, the tentative hope. She thought of Catherine, of the importance of family, of forgiveness, of second chances. She thought of the life she had built, the strength she had found, the capacity for love and compassion that had grown within her. And she realized that holding on to anger and resentment would only poison her own happiness, would only diminish the joy she had fought so hard to claim. "I would like that, Mother," Eleanor said softly, squeezing her mother's hand. "I would like that very much. It will take time, and it will not be easy, but yes, I forgive you, and I would very much like for you to be part of Catherine's life and part of ours." Lady Beaumont let out a sob of relief, pulling Eleanor into an embrace, the first genuine, unguarded embrace they had shared in years. They held each other for a long moment, tears mingling, old wounds beginning to heal. Catherine, sensing the shift in atmosphere, toddled over and climbed onto the sofa, inserting herself between them, her small hands patting both their faces as if offering her own blessing to this tentative reconciliation. When Elias returned home that evening, tired and weary from a long day at the hospital, he found his parlour filled with unexpected warmth and laughter. Eleanor sat on the sofa, Catherine on her lap, and beside them, engaged in animated conversation, was Lady Beaumont. Eleanor looked up as he entered, her face radiant with happiness, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Elias," she said, rising to greet him, "my mother has come to visit, and we have made our peace." Dake, Elias, ever perceptive, understood immediately the significance of this moment. He bowed politely to Lady Beaumont, his expression warm and welcoming. "Lady Beaumont, it is an honour to finally meet you properly. You are most welcome in our home." Lady Beaumont rose, studying this man her daughter had chosen, this physician of modest means and no particular social standing, who had captured Eleanor's heart and given her a life of purpose and happiness. She saw the intelligence in his eyes, the compassion in his expression, the genuine love and respect with which he looked at Eleanor, and she understood, finally, truly understood, why Eleanor had chosen him, why she had defied convention, risked everything to be with him. "Dr. Reed," she said, her voice sincere, "the honour is mine. Thank you for making my daughter so happy. Thank you for giving her the life she deserves. And thank you for my beautiful granddaughter." That evening, they dined together, a simple meal of roast chicken, vegetables and bread, prepared by Eleanor with Lady Beaumont's surprisingly enthusiastic assistance in the tiny kitchen. They talked, laughed, shared stories, and began, tentatively, to rebuild the fractured bonds of family. It was not a complete reconciliation, not an erasure of the past, but it was a beginning. A fragile bridge built across a chasm of hurt and misunderstanding, a testament to the power of forgiveness, love, and second chances. As spring returned to London, painting the city in shades of green and gold, Eleanor stood once more in her small front garden, watching as Catherine, now a confident, chattering toddler, helped her plant new roses, her small hands digging enthusiastically in the soil, her laughter ringing out like bells. Elias stood beside Eleanor, his arm around her waist, watching their daughter with an expression of profound contentment. Aunt Agatha sat on a bench nearby, offering unsolicited but affectionate gardening advice, while Lady Beaumont, now a regular visitor, poured tea from a thermos, a sight that would have been unthinkable just a year prior. Eleanor looked around at this scene. Her modest home, her small but vibrant garden, her beloved husband, her precious daughter, her unconventional aunt, and her mother, tentatively but genuinely reconnecting, and felt a wave of overwhelming gratitude wash over her. This was her life, the life she had chosen, the life she had fought for, the life she had built with courage, love, and unwavering determination. It was not the life she had been raised to expect, not the grand, aristocratic existence that had once seemed her inevitable destiny, but it was infinitely better. It was real, authentic, filled with purpose, love, and genuine connection. It was a life where she was valued not for her title or her suitability as an ornament, but for her intelligence, her compassion, her character. It was a life where she was free to think, to speak, to choose, to grow. It was a life where she had bloomed, not in the sterile, controlled environment of a gilded cage, but in the rich, fertile soil of freedom and love. She thought, briefly, of the Duke, of the cold, controlling man she had nearly married, the man who had viewed her as property, as a means to an end. She wondered occasionally what had become of him, whether he had found another suitable bride to adorn his estates, whether he ever thought of her, whether he ever regretted his actions. But these thoughts were fleeting, devoid of bitterness or longing. That chapter of her life was closed, a cautionary tale, a reminder of the path not taken, the cage she had escaped. Her true life, her real life, had begun the moment she had found the courage to say no, to claim her own voice, to choose love over duty, freedom over security. It had begun in Aunt Agatha's unconventional drawing room, in the passionate debates and intellectual explorations that had awakened her mind. It had begun in the warm, compassionate gaze of Dr. Elias Reed, a man who had seen her, truly seen her, and loved her for who she was, not what she represented. It had begun in the small, modest house on Marchmont Street, in the demanding but deeply fulfilling work of teaching and advocacy, in the overwhelming, transformative love of motherhood. Eleanor Beaumont, the frightened, trapped girl who had once embroidered lifeless flowers and dreamed of escape, was gone. In her place stood Eleanor Reed, wife, mother, teacher, advocate, and a woman who had claimed her own destiny. She had fought a war of hearts, not with weapons or armies, but with courage, conviction, and an unwavering belief in her own worth. And she had won, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple, profound act of choosing herself, choosing love, choosing life. She had bloomed where she was planted, and the garden she had cultivated with its modest roses and cheerful marigolds, its laughter and love, its purpose and passion, was more beautiful, more valuable, more real than any grand estate or gilded cage could ever be. This was her victory, this was her happiness, this was her life, freely chosen and deeply cherished, and it was, in every way that mattered, absolutely perfect. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled.